Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Saiyan Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Winged Deku Got Mutation Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. They always took his things. It didn't matter how valuable they were. They took the stones he collected when he went outside, the pens he pilfered after lessons, even his own feathers and scales that he squirreled away under his mattress. The emptiness of his room echoed in his soul, making him twitchy, making his fingers itch with the need to take. He started hoarding knowledge instead, desperately trying to sate his craving. The alternative worked moderately well, and it gave him an advantage when defending himself to know what quirks would be used against him, which side his opponent favored, what their tells were. He used this information to defeat the boy in front of him who used only his right side to attack, who crippled himself by refusing to use half his power. That weakness would get him killed. The fight was over in under 5 minutes, the other boy gasping on the floor with fangs grazing his jugular. 49 return your corner. At the order of his handler, 49 seconds wings flinched in annoyance, and he pressed his fangs deeper into the boy's skin for a moment before crawling backward off his opponent. The lack of fear in the other boy's sent a wave of irritation through him. Did the boy not realize that 49 could have ended him right then? 49 seconds fangs ached with the need to bury themselves into something. Still, he went and stood in his corner, the chafing of the obedience collar around his own throat reminding him to suppress those instincts. Todoroki, the handler, a slim blonde with cold gray eyes. I expected more improvement since you entered UAS hero course. Are they not challenging you enough? The boy, Todoroki, drew himself upright, face expressionless. UA performs adequately. And yet, you do not, the handler hissed, typing on her tablet. I will have to inform your father of this failure. The boy's expression didn't waver, but 49 caught the first hint of fear on his scent. It did not help 49 restrain his urge to finish the fight. The handler sighed, glancing at her watch. Your required 5 hours are up. You know the way out. With a short bow and not a glance in 49 seconds' direction, Todoroki vanished through the double doors. The training room now only held the two of them. The handler looked 49 over with a critical eye. He remained at parade rest in the corner, ignoring the increasingly painful throbbing from his shoulder where Todoroki had managed to freeze a palm-sized chunk of skin. I'm disappointed. The words gave 49 just enough warning to throw himself as far into the back of his mind as possible before electricity tore through his body from the circle of metal around his throat. He dropped with all the grace of a puppet with its strings cut, jerking and only a brief hiss of pain escaping his locked jaw. The handler allowed the electricity to ravage him for a few seconds before turning it off, leaving 49 twitching on the floor. Your pupils slitted, toxin secretion from your fangs increased 80%, and your body temperature rose 15 degrees. The woman came to stand over him, scrutinizing his form dispassionately. Your objective, 49, was to beat Todoroki like a human. Her lip curled in disgust, and she lifted a boot to step directly onto his splayed wing. You failed. 49 didn't respond. His glazed eyes stared at the gray concrete walls, bile rising in his throat. With a muted crunch, the handler ground his wing between her boot and the cold floor. Agony contracted his muscles, and 49 puked, narrowly missing the shiny black boot. The handler leaped back with a cry of disgust. Filthy animal, she hissed, nose scrunching at the smell. Without a second glance, she spun around and strode off towards the same double doors his opponent had disappeared through. 49 didn't move, knowing someone would arrive soon to drag him to his room. If he was lucky, they might set his broken bones first so he wouldn't be completely useless as an asset. If he was lucky, 49 coughed on a pitiful laugh. That'd be a first. How was the flaming trash can this weekend? Hitoshi eyed Todoroki suspiciously. His expression hadn't been this carefully blank since first year. I barely saw him. Raising an eyebrow, Hitoshi said, Really? Then who pissed in your Cheerios? His mismatched eyebrows drew together. I'm not eating Cheerios, nor would I expect someone to urinate in them if I were. Hitoshi rolled his eyes. Why does your face look like that if your father wasn't an almighty dick? Todoroki frowned. I was training with the commission over the weekend. Hitoshi spit out the coffee he'd just drunk. You were what? Todoroki blinked at him. Training. With the hero commission at my father's request. How long have you been doing that? Off and on for years. Todoroki shrugged. My father usually handles my training himself, but sometimes he wants me to train against different styles and quirks. Hitoshi gaped at him. Does my dad know about this? I don't think so, Todoroki said. Why would I tell Aizawa? Anyway, he continued. That wasn't my point. I saw another kid while I was training. They had a spar together. He frowned. I was unaware of any other children receiving such training, and his appeared to be even more intense than my own. Hitoshi nearly spit out his coffee again. More intense. Wide violet eyes stared at Todoroki. What exactly did you see? Todoroki wasn't always the best judge of what behaviors were normal or acceptable. if what Todoroki had seen was bad enough to make even him uncomfortable. Itoshi was very concerned. Itoshi's grip tightened on his travel mug as Todoroki explained, and by the end he was white-knuckling it. "Did she see you?" he asked. Todoroki shook his head. "I don't think so. The cameras would have picked up on it if someone wanted to look. But I left as soon as I saw her headed toward the doors." Good. Nothing about this situation was good. But at least they hadn't caught Todoroki spying. "Are you going back there?" He frowned. "Most likely, but not for a while. It's usually months between sessions." Itoshi blew out a breath. "Okay, but next time, you need to tell someone." He shook his head, hunching over his mug. "I don't like this. The commission is shady as hell. And if you are going to keep up these training sessions, then you need to let us know so they can't just disappear you somewhere without anyone knowing." "I doubt my father would allow that." Still, Hitoshi gripped Todoroki's shoulder, the boy jolting slightly from the unexpected physical contact. "Promise me." Todoroki studied him for a minute before slowly nodding. "I will." Hitoshi let his hand drop. Good. He needed to talk to his dad. Aizawa frowned at him. Todoroki saw all of this. Hitoshi nodded. He seemed a little disconcerted, but he didn't seem to realize just how bad it was. "We need to get him in therapy." Aizawa scrubbed a hand over his face. "You did the right thing, coming to me. Thank you for trusting me with this." Hitoshi shifted uncomfortably, eyes on his shoes. "Sure, of course." Aizawa gripped his son's shoulder until he met his eyes. "Are you okay?" Hitoshi frowned, looking away. "It wasn't anything like what I went through. No triggers. You never know." Aizawa squeezed his shoulder before releasing him. "Let me know if that changes. We can always schedule an appointment with your therapist." "Thanks," he muttered. "I'm gonna go study." "Okay." Aizawa hummed, waving him off. They healed him fully. While 49 was happy not to be in pain, he knew what that meant. They had a mission for him. A mixture of anticipation and dread curdled in his gut at the thought. A mission meant he went outside. It meant a break from training in concrete and pain. A mission meant death. If he was lucky, it could be something as simple as infiltrating and stealing files, but those jobs were few and far between, reserved for agents with less lethal skill sets. 49 with his fangs and talons and venom was practically created to usher others over death's threshold. 49 with his speed and his strength and those instincts that urged him to bury his teeth into soft, warm flesh. He'd come to terms with what he was. At times, he'd been confused by what they wanted from him. He was trained to be more vicious, then beaten when he ripped into his opponents. He stalked his targets like a predator, but was reprimanded when his behavior began to reflect one, his words becoming snarls and growls, eyes and body language communicating a feral warning. Then he'd realized, they wanted him to be a monster. They just didn't want to see it. So, 49 carefully split himself in two. He built a human mask with stiff movements and a blank expression. This mask stayed in place throughout any and all interactions with his handlers. The one thing this mask could not imitate was human speech. 49 knew he'd been able to speak when he was younger. He knew Japanese words had once dripped from his tongue in a near-endless stream. But somehow, this ability was lost in the split, and now his tongue sat heavy in his mouth and his jaw was wired shut. His human mask was fragile and words would break it. Behind the mask, 49 sank into his instincts. He growled and bit, hoarded and stole. There was safety in being a predator, being a monster. A predator didn't feel self-pity when he was beaten. He found a way to survive. A monster didn't wallow in loneliness as it stared at blank concrete walls, waiting for the next touch of pain. At times, 49 thought there was a third person inside of him. This person was small and quiet and wept when his talons bit into a target's exposed throat. When his handlers left him to sit in a cooling puddle of blood to teach him the importance of clean kills, 49 mostly ignored this person. 49 took the file they handed him. A handler before him was the one that monitored him during missions. He was a short, stocky man in a bland suit, rusty hair bristling on his cheeks and a single tooth crooked in an otherwise pristine set. 49 hated him. The handler, Hebai, made his disgust for 49 exceptionally clear. When 49 had spotted the man's own minor mutation, flat ears and a green, slightly pointed tongue, he huffed at the man's overcompensation for his own inferiority complex. Mutations were disgusting. Inhuman. 49 understood that much, and so the handler made certain that 49 knew he was that much better, that much more human. 49 didn't want to be human. He opened the file. Assassination of a minor government official. The file didn't say what the woman had done to earn the commission's wrath. 49 didn't ask. The handler sat and turned the key to the van, engine waking with a rumble. 49 flipped open the case containing his suit. Mottled shades of black and dark gray turned the eye away better than solid black. Other than a multitude of knife sheaths and the smoke bombs hanging from his belt, 49's second suit contained no weapons. He briefly considered that, despite complaining about his animalistic tendencies, the commission expected him to make most kills barehanded. When possible, they liked to claim that his kills were freak animal attacks. Hebai found this endlessly amusing. He ignored the nausea that built the longer they were on the road. He hated cars. Scanning the rest of the file had given him the layout of the target's home. Other than staff, the woman lived alone. A glance at his watch told him it was nearing 2 a.m. No one should be wandering around. Another 30 minutes passed before his handler parked. They were still a mile from the house, but the man wouldn't risk being nearby if 49 fucked up. Backup was a pipe dream. 49 tried to scramble out of the van before his handler could haul himself out of the driver's seat. But the man could move surprisingly quickly. Blocking the door, his handler stared down at him with an unfamiliar expression. Unknowingly, 49 seconds' pupils slitted, sensing danger. The solid, fluorescent green that made up the iris and sclera of his eyes seemed to flare brighter. Uneasy and unsure why, 49 risked signing what? To the man. Muddy brown eyes trailed down 49 seconds' suit, lingering. The man's tongue flicked between his teeth like the snake his codename referred to. Eventually, he focused on 49 seconds' face. Don't fuck it up. Taking one last look, the man stepped aside. Acid rose in 49 seconds' throat as he slipped past, careful not to touch any part of his handler as he escaped into the night. The look in the man's eye froze his blood, and 49 found himself wishing that the old disgust would replace it. 49 scrambled to duck as a series of sharp projectiles embedded themselves in the wall above his head. He hated it when the targets weren't stupid. This one, apparently realizing that she had earned the ire of the commission, had hired a bodyguard. His opponent, it appeared, had blades in the place of hair, and she had no qualms about ripping them out to hurl at him. That looked like it hurt. Not only that, but he recognized the symbol on the armband she wore. It indicated that she was part of a mercenary group he'd encountered before. Maybe he could use this though. The commission liked it when he staged the crime scene to take attention away from them. Silver Lotus, the mercenary group, had no set allegiances, which meant that after he killed her, he could make it look like they attacked his target. A knife buried itself in his shoulder, the one he'd just had healed from training with that half-and-half kid. Fight now, plan later. The pain shook off the last vestiges of his human persona. An animalistic snarl ripped from his throat, and the mercenary froze briefly in shock. 49 seconds' wings flared as he sprung onto his opponent, eyes glowing, venom dripping from his mouth. Kami, what the fuck? The woman gasped, stabbing at him as she tumbled backward. He twisted and grabbed her hand, snapping her wrist with a brutal twist before grabbing the knife and plunging it into her neck. It was over in a few seconds. 49 panted, a low snarl still rumbling in his chest as he fought the urge to bury his fangs in her leaking neck. He resisted. There was a reason he used her own knife. His venom was traceable. And while the commission could handle it, he didn't want to risk pissing them off, so that they finally made good on their threat to remove his fangs altogether. A noise above caught his attention. His target must have heard the commotion. Leaving the mercenary to bleed out, 49 wiped the blood off his shoes and raced upstairs on silent feet. 49 allowed himself to fade from view as he moved toward the source of the noise. The mercenary had been wearing lenses that allowed her to see body heat, rendering his quirk useless. He doubted his target would be similarly equipped. In the end, it was laughably easy to subdue the target and drag her into the bloody foyer. He didn't enjoy the terror in her eyes or the babbling pleas from behind his hand, but it would be much easier to kill her next to the mercenary than have to arrange the bodies and clean one of the rooms. When 49 slipped from the house, he left behind two bodies, one slumped over the other. He hoped it was somewhat believable that theirs was a mutual destruction. But if not, the commission would think of something. His shoulders slumped as he crept through the trees back to the van. His shoulder was bleeding, but he was pretty sure he'd managed to pack the wound before any dripped over the scene. The night air was crisp and smelled like life, unlike the dead air of the commission facility. 49 seconds' fingers stroked the small figurine he'd swiped from the woman's nightstand. It was glass and metal, only 2 inches tall and depicting a seated ape, pondering over the human skull clasped in its hand. 49 loved it. He frowned, pondering where to hide it. In the end, he shoved it into the small pouch that had held the gauze he'd used on his shoulder and hoped he'd be able to slip it into the pocket of the commission-issued sweatpants without getting caught. His mood dropped as the van came into view. The tracker in his collar alerting his handler to his vicinity, the door slid open. Hebai's ruddy face poked out, eyeing him. "Took you long enough," the man muttered, turning away. 49 swung through the open door silently, pulling it shut behind him. Hebai started the car. Exhaling in pain, 49 pulled down the zipper and peeled off the top of his suit. A lump of crimson gauze fell with the motion, fresh blood rushing to fill the gap. He rifled through the first aid kit, looking for more gauze before he realized that the van wasn't moving. He froze, eyes darting to the front. His handler stood between the front seats, watching, and 49 seconds' instinct screamed at him. His breath picked up, but his face didn't change as he forced himself to continue his task while keeping an eye on the man. Better treatment for his stab wound would have to wait. He dumped disinfectant on it without hesitation, blinking back tears before shoving more gauze into the wound and wrapping it. That done, he paused. He needed to change out of his suit. Hebai was still watching. Do you need something? He signed, face blank. Fear finally won, and 49 seconds' eyes slitted as the man stepped toward him. He took a half step back. A greasy smile spread over the man's face. Don't be like that. The commission is fed up with your little serial killer trophies, so now I gotta search you at the end of each mission. 49 shook his head, hands beginning to tremble. He liked his new statue. It fit in his hand perfectly. It was his. But 49 had been searched before by other handlers, and he didn't want Hebai's hands on him. Fighting the shrieking in his head that wanted to hide his treasure, 49 pulled the statue out of his pouch and practically threw it at the man. He raised his hands to show they were empty. Please go away. The handler caught the statue, peering at it. Fucking morbid, he muttered. Orders are orders. You know that drill. He smirked, hands on the wall. His eyes and cheeks burned. Disobedience was not an option. 49 swallowed the metallic taste clinging to his tongue and did as he was told. Months passed before Hitoshi received the text. Training at the HPSC today. Should be done by 8 p.m. Hitoshi stared at his phone, heart beating faster. Shit, he really didn't like this. He swallowed. Okay, thanks for telling me. Let me know if you need anything. Okay. Hitoshi tapped his dad's contact information. What's wrong? Hitoshi hated talking on the phone. It's Todoroki. He texted me. He's training at the commission today. He could practically feel the tension coming off Aizawa through the phone. Today. Why? I don't know. He said that his dad schedules it. Aizawa sighed. Shit. Okay, thanks kid. Yeah. Hitoshi started to feel like maybe he'd overreacted. Sorry to bother you. You're not a bother, Aizawa scolded gently. You staying in the dorms tonight or coming over? Hitoshi frowned. I think I'll stay with you guys if that's okay. Jiru and Bakugo have been playing together and the dorms have been hella loud. If you never say hella again in my presence, I will allow it. You've been spending too much time with Kaminari. Hitoshi snorted. Bet. I'm hanging up now. He laughed as Aizawa did just that. Joke's on him. Hitoshi had learned most of his slang from Hisashi. Hitoshi paused in the doorway. Aizawa and Hisashi were arguing. What Nedzu says, it's been months. These kids need help. If half of what Hawks said is true, then we should have stormed the fucking place by now. He heard Aizawa sigh. This isn't like raiding a drug ring. This is a major pillar of our government. If we're not careful, we could completely destabilize Japan. The HPSC represents safety and order and half a dozen other important virtues that society relies on. Even if they are human trafficking, quirkist, corrupt pieces of shit. We have to do this carefully. The blood drained out of Hitoshi's face. What was going on? Hisashi was banging around the kitchen, frustration obvious in each slam of a cabinet. So what now? We have Nedzu, Hawks, Mirko, and a dozen other highly ranked heroes ready to shut that facility down. What are we waiting for? Nedzu and Hawks putting the final touches on an expose that will show the public what's happening so that we don't all get sent to Tartarus as traitors and borderline vigilantes. Unconsciously, Hitoshi had leaned forward to hear better, and the floor creaked. The voices stopped. Wide-eyed, Hitoshi hurriedly shut the door behind him and kicked off his shoes, trying to look like he hadn't been eavesdropping on an extremely dangerous, extremely classified conversation between pro-heroes. One look at Aizawa's face told him he did not succeed. Hitoshi, Hisashi smiled, just a tad too bright. I didn't realize you were staying tonight. I don't have to, he said cautiously. Heat prickled on his neck at Aizawa's unrelenting stare. You know we love it when you stay, little listener. Hisashi threw the last of the dishes into the cabinets. I figured we'd just do ramen tonight if that works. He smiled weakly. Sounds great, thanks Papa. With Hisashi no longer bustling around, they stood in awkward silence. Finally, Shinsou couldn't take it. Okay, he blurted, meeting Aizawa's eyes. I heard what you guys were talking about and I know you're planning to raid the HPSC and it probably has something to do with Hawks and what Todoroki told me and I told you about that kid they were training. He gasped, running out of breath. Aizawa's stern look took on a hint of smugness. We need to work on your ability to stay strong in an interrogation, is all he said before turning to pour himself a mug of coffee. Hitoshi's eyes followed the stream. Can I have some? He asked, almost forgetting his predicament in the lure of caffeine. You're cut off for the next 3 days. Hitoshi blanched. You wouldn't. Aizawa sipped at his cup of heaven. I just did. Pride discarded. Hitoshi dropped to his knees. I will give you anything you want. I will grade your papers. I'll scrub the old blood out of your capture scarf. He searched desperately for something suitably persuasive. I'll tell you the secret to my cappuccinos. Aizawa's eyebrows lifted at the offer. You said you'd die before you told me that. If you deprive me of coffee for 3 days, I will die. A slow, miserable, caffeineless death. Hitoshi shuddered. Aizawa considered. I accept your terms. Shouta, Hisashi sighed, exasperated. You're supposed to parent in this situation. This isn't harsh enough for you. Aizawa eyed his husband. And they think I'm cruel. Hey, Hisashi complained, I resent that. Aizawa shrugged and made Hitoshi a mug. The crumpled teen babbled thanks before burying his face in the mud. You should not have heard that, Aizawa started. Hitoshi looked up from his tangle of limbs on the floor. But, he shrugged, since you did, do you have any questions or anything you need explained? Hitoshi hesitated. Are you guys going to get in trouble? The two men softened. Azashi knelt and swept Hitoshi into a hug. We'll be fine, baby, he promised. That's why it's taking so long. I'm impatient, but everyone is working really hard to make sure this goes smoothly for everyone involved. Azashi met Shouda's eyes over Hitoshi's head. We're going to get them all out. The commission didn't provide him an earpiece. They were too traceable, too identifiable, and they encouraged agents to ask for assistance instead, making every mission a solitary life or death scenario. Instead, the commission had a few specific codes that every agent knew. Unfortunately, they were communicated through his least favorite piece of equipment, the obedience collar. 49 hissed as 3 short electric shocks jolted through him. Thankfully, he wasn't actively in combat, but they still stung. His eyebrows knit together. 3 consecutive shocks. Retreat. He'd never received that order before. 49 surveyed the shabby motel hallway but couldn't find any reason for the directive. Still, he wasn't going to waste time trying to figure it out. If he took too long, Hebai would zap him again out of spite. His jaw clenched as he backed towards the window he'd come in through. Hopefully they wouldn't send him back in after they sorted whatever the problem was. His chances of getting caught were far higher after breaching the premises once before. The moon hid behind heavy clouds that released a gentle misting spray. He appreciated the fresh scent, but the fine droplets made him uncomfortably damp. After a few minutes of jogging, the van came in sight. The door slammed open before his hand could touch it, and he was hauled inside. 49 bared his teeth at the unexpected contact before he wiped his expression clean. It wasn't fast enough, but his handler seemed too frantic to jump on the infraction like he usually would. Get the fuck inside and shut up, the man snapped, yanking the door shut and practically leaping into the driver's seat. 49 lurched as the van jerked into motion. He swayed, unsure if he should change out of his suit or not. Hebai was muttering, fiddling with the radio. The commission's secure line filled the air. Mirko and Edshot have infiltrated Level 4, an agitated female voice said. All agents secure your assets. If this is impossible, you are ordered to terminate. Repeat, secure or terminate all assets. Pro heroes have assaulted Facility F. The panic continued as new voices jumped into the fray. 49 seconds blood ran cold. The facility ... was under assault. Assets were being terminated. But Hebai didn't seem to be taking that option. It would only take the press of a button to discharge enough electricity to stop his heart. So what now? Escape wasn't possible so long as this collar remained around his throat. And the damn thing had a failsafe to ensure he protected his handler. If the man's heart stopped, so would his. This left 49 with only one option. Wait and see what his handler had in store for him. They drove in silence for long enough that the sun started to peek over the horizon. The commission's transmission had cut out not long after 49 returned to the van, leaving them both in the dark. 49 could only assume the heroes had shut it down. His thoughts were cut off when Hebai took a sharp turn and slammed to a stop in front of a seedy motel not dissimilar to the one he'd been in just hours previously. The man huffed, scrubbing his face over his face before turning to face 49. He eyed 49's second suit, and for once the gaze held only clinical assessment. Change. We need to not draw attention, meaning you can't go around looking like a B-list vigilante. Rude. The nictating membrane slid over 49 seconds' eyes, the subtle version of an eye roll he'd developed after years of maintaining an inscrutable expression. He complied, however, glad that the man's attention remained elsewhere as he sorted through the mess they were in. Despite changing into his only other clothes, commission sweats, 49 strapped as many weapons to his body as possible. When he was done, knives lined his ribs beneath the bulky sweatshirt, more tucked into the boots he decided to keep. They looked a little odd but not suspicious. One pocket held a miniature first aid kit, the other several minuscule smoke bombs. By the end, he looked like an oddly lumpy, sloppy, underdressed teenager. Hebai's lack of scathing comment communicated his approval. Having jammed cash and a handgun into his bag, 49 seconds handler slid the door open and jumped out. Act fucking normal. 49 followed. The man manning the front desk eyed them, but besides the filthy slur he threw at 49 for his mutations, he let them rent and retreat to a room in relative peace. Hebai hurled his bag across the room as 49 shut the door behind them, and 49 flinched as the fully loaded firearm slammed into the opposing wall. It didn't go off. The man sneered at him. Go the fuck to sleep. I've seen enough of your ugly mug for one day. I've gotta sort this shit out. The incident with the gun shook something in 49, and the reality of the situation started to sink in. Shower, he signed. The man's eyes narrowed as if an idea had struck. Yes, 49 retreated to the bathroom. not letting his hands shake until the lock slid into place. Many bottles of soap rattled as he grasped the sides of the sink, hunching over the bowl. Thankfully, the fan was obnoxiously loud, covering the sound of his panicking breaths. After a few seconds, 49 forced a deep inhale into his lungs and looked up. Glowing reptilian eyes stared back at him. 5 things you see. Shaggy green hair, curls frayed and ragged, light freckles blending into the green scales on his cheekbones, disappearing into his hairline. Pointed ears, one nearly split in two from the same training accident that had carved a line from his right cheek under his eye, across his nose, and ending just above the left corner of his mouth. Scratches in the cheap plastic sink where he'd unconsciously dug into it with his talons. 4 wings flared, curling around him like a shield against the world. Onyx and emerald shone in the scales and feathers. No matter how often his handlers griped about their unsuitability for stealth missions, his hands relaxed. The trembling hadn't abated, but he managed to turn to the shower and turn on the faucet. Methodically, he stripped out of his clothing and weaponry and into the spray, trying to keep his shoulder from getting soaked. The likelihood of that getting healed anytime soon if the commission had been taken down by heroes. He swallowed, stopping that train of thought as his breathing picked up again. But he had to think about it. He was flying blind in this situation, and he had absolutely no faith in his handler's ability to keep them alive, and even less in the idea that he would act in 49 seconds' best interest. The only way. 49 had never seen an escape attempt succeed, never even heard of it. But then, most assets didn't have the opportunity he was being presented with. They were in a single room, which meant, at some point, Hebai would be asleep. His reaction time might just be slow enough for 49 to steal the control to the obedience collar. Unfortunately, he couldn't kill the man, and the control didn't remove the collar to his knowledge. Still, it was something. This might be his one shot. The commission was in shambles, and his handler was flying by the seat of his pants. And if 49 died in the attempt... He shrugged off the idea. Worse things could happen. Violent banging rattled the bathroom door. What the fuck are you doing in there? Having a fucking spa day? Get out so I can take a piss. 49 huffed but turned off the water. His body ached, pain spreading from his shoulder as his body tried to cope with the trauma. Inflammation stiffened the joint, and he winced as he strapped his knife harness back over his damp chest and pulled on his shirt. The door rattled again. He yanked on his pants and twisted the knob to let the man in. Peeved, his handler glared at him, already yanking at his belt. The motion sent a hard twist in his gut, and 49 shot through the doorway like his feet were on fire, forgetting the towel for his damp hair. Nerves shot through him, making him jittery and killing the hunger that had begun to make itself known. Tonight, he inhaled deeply, straightening his spine and forced confidence. He'd make his escape tonight. It's filthy. 49 cracked his eyelids open, barely silencing a groan from the familiar stiffness of extended electrocution. Someone had knocked him out with the obedience collar. His mind whirled, memory piecing back together. His handler spending hours on the computer, furiously typing away while 49 pretended to sleep. Finally, closing the laptop and grabbing his gun as he laid down. Breath deepening, 49 making his move. The struggle, 49 striking the man over the head with his own gun and running for the door as his handler struggled to drag himself upright, opening the door to find no fewer than 5 men outside, guns already pointed at him, attacking them anyway. Electricity, blackness. You would find a hospital cleanroom filthy if the rumors are to be believed. That was his handler's voice. Asset 49, distasteful appearance aside, is a killing machine with absolute obedience, perfect for assassination, infiltration, or any more unconventional interests you might have. Lascivious innuendo dripped from the words. 49 narrowed his eyes, trying to focus his swimming vision on the man in front of him. A plague mask obscured most of his features, but he appeared to be a rather plain, unobtrusive man. His only eye-catching feature was the disgust he radiated. Absolute obedience, the man repeated, unimpressed. And yet, 2 of my men were killed by your asset as it was attempting an escape. Feeling was starting to return to his limbs. Ah, well, Chisaki, Hebai forced a laugh. These are unusual circumstances. He would have never attempted that during a normal mission. Even the most well-behaved pets can panic when their routine is interrupted. The nausea intensified as 49 realized the man wasn't actually wrong. The man's unimpressed expression didn't waver. Sensing he was losing his audience, 49 seconds handler grasped him by shoulders, lifting him. Hissed words, flecked with spittle, spilled into his ears. Stand the fuck up and make an impression, or so help me I will make your life a living hell. 49 seconds knees buckled for only a moment before he locked them, forcing strength into his limbs. It hadn't taken long to realize what this was. Hebai was selling him to Yakuza if he judged the situation correctly. 49 had worked enough jobs involving Yakuza to recognize the look, even if the commission preferred to use him on government targets. While brutal, cutthroat, and merciless, Yakuza weren't always the most thorough and organized group. Maybe he could use that to his advantage. 49 stiffened his spine, executing a short bow toward the leader in the plague mask. Chisake, Hebai had called him. Without speech, there really wasn't much else he could do. Any demonstration of his skill set would undoubtedly be taken as a threat. Hebai seemed to realize this. Would any of your men like to challenge him? He suggested. It's hard to gauge the value of a weapon with seeing its potential firsthand. The man appeared to consider this before waving towards one of his men. The man stepped forward. Masuji Goto, known rather uncreatively as Muscular. The League of Villains lent him to me as a show of good faith. If your asset wins against him, I will purchase it at your asking price. If it fails, you get nothing. If he fails, he dies. Muscular grinned. I fight to the death. That wasn't part of the agreement, Hebai whined. No doubt afraid of losing his asset. It is now. Your lack of faith in your product only reinforces the necessity of this test. He had no choice. Very well. His handler bowed, then grabbed 49 by the chin, digging sharp nails into his jaw. You will not fail. 49 ripped himself away from his handler, no longer concerned with feigning respect. He would have spat on him if his mouth wasn't so dry. The men backed towards the edges of the room as 49 faced his opponent. He ripped off his sweatshirt, not wanting to give the man any extra material to grab onto. His knives were gone. Not much of a talker, eh? The enormous man seemed to find this hilarious, raking a hand through his blonde hair with a laugh. That's fine. Since your quirk is obvious, I'll let you in on mine. My quirk's a muscle enhancer. These muscle fibers of mine can't be contained even by my skin. They raise the standard in speed. In power. He flexed and exposed muscle writhed in the air. 49 felt nauseous. Get on with it, the Yakuza leader intoned. The man laughed again, hysterically. 49 stood silently. The man charged, and 49 vanished. Oh, Muscular grinned. This might be an interesting fight after all. He stumbled half a step as invisible claws raked across his face, narrowly missing the metal eye that spun in an otherwise empty socket. Little beast, you'll have to do better than that. Without warning, Muscular's arm shot out, punching 49 so hard in the chest that he flew backwards and slammed into the wall. He crumpled to the floor, gasping in pain and shock. 49 lost his hold on invisibility. How did he? Blood splattered the floor as he coughed violently. Ha ha ha. Blood. Love it. So fun. This guy was insane. 49 dragged himself upright. This time, Muscular waited for his approach, clearly not expecting too much of a fight. 49 took his time getting up, cataloging his injuries. He couldn't make this an endurance fight. Maybe if he hadn't taken that hit, but he'd underestimated his opponent's speed and reflexes. With a breath, he sank inside himself. There was only one way for this to end. 49 blacked out. When he came to himself, he crouched over the body of Muscular. The taste of blood coated his mouth. The man's throat was ravaged. Pieces of white spinal cord peeked out of the mauled flesh. His remaining eye was gone. And when 49 looked down, clear liquid was congealing under his talons, sticking two of his fingers together. Bile rose in his throat. A glance around the room revealed horrified expressions on all sides. Even Hebai, arguably the most familiar with his capacity for brutality, looked like he wanted to vomit. Still, he gathered himself. As you can see, the man paused, swallowing. 49 is more than capable of carrying out any task you require. Shisake now held a hand over his plague mask as though to further protect himself from the filth 49 had unleashed. It does appear to possess an impressive lack of conscience, but can it restrain itself? For the task I require, it needs to protect and restrain its target. Absolutely, Hebai assured. 49 has received extensive training as a bodyguard. Additionally, he is outfitted with the obedience collar we discussed previously, and you can link him and the target so that he cannot turn on them without dying himself. Very well. Shisake looked him over once more where he was frozen beside the corpse of Muscular. Transfer the device to me, and my men will compensate you. Hirono. The man beside him snapped to attention. See that it is cleaned and prepared to metery. The man nodded in just a few steps. His hand was wrapped around 49 seconds bicep, yanking him off Muscular's corpse. 49 didn't resist. He tried to pay attention to the winding hallways and note landmarks, but everything looked the same and his head was fuzzy. Hirono pushed him into a room. The floors and walls were concrete, maybe 10 by 15. Two looped hoses hung next to the door, and a large stain drain stood in the middle of the room, floors sloping towards it. Take off your clothes, Hirono said, pulling the door shut. He pulled a hose off the wall. 49 seconds' expression didn't change as he did as he was told. He dropped his clothes near the wall. The man nodded to the middle of the room, and 49 moved there, bracing himself. He still wasn't prepared for the cold. He hissed through his teeth as freezing water pelted him, harsh and stinging, and he instantly began to shake. His arms came up to protect himself, and the man snapped at him to put them down. When he was told to turn, he flinched as the spray hit his sensitive wings, twisting feathers painfully. The spray cut off eventually, and he was doused in heavy, gritty foam that made him want to crawl out of his skin. The man left that on him for several minutes, until he almost couldn't hold back tears of pain from the vicious sting it created in his wounds. This time, he was almost thankful for the brutally cold water. His shaking hands barely caught the towel that was thrown at him as he was directed to dress in clothes from the plastic cabinet that stood in the corner of the room. 49 forced his shaking limbs into the fabric as quickly as he could, but hesitated with the shirt in his hands. There was no clothing here for mutations. He held up the shirt to the man, lifting his wings to show the problem. The man huffed, tightening the tie on his long white blonde hair. Striding over, he took the shirt. With a frown, he pulled out a knife, and 49 edged back, hands raising defensively. The man rolled his eyes. Relax. He slit the back of the shirt, leaving 2 strips of fabric on the collar and bottom hem to hold the fabric together. Put that on. We've wasted enough time. It was a bit of a struggle, but 49 managed it. He cringed as cold air hit his exposed back. The man looked him over critically. It'll do. He strode out of the room, clearly expecting 49 to follow. He did. This time, 49 was able to pay more attention. The cold water had washed away the last of his days. He noted the rooms that held weapons, which sections seemed more heavily populated. Hirono led him up a set of stairs. This floor was far more of a living space. They entered another room. It was warm, fully furnished, and a lit fireplace. Heavily brocaded chairs flanked a matching couch that sat on a rich red and gold rug. Chisaki stood before a large wooden table, flipping through a stack of papers. Behind him were 2 men, playing with visible weapons. Thugs. 49 seconds gaze sharpened on the flash of white between them. A child. 49 seconds heartbeat picked up, eyes narrowing on the smaller figure. Her long white hair tangled around the small horn protruding from her forehead, and her arms and legs were wrapped in an abundance of bandages. His nostrils flared in rage. They hurt her. His eyes flew to Chisaki, and he almost took a step back when he saw the other man's eyes already on him. Assessing, calculating. Maybe I won't have to worry about you injuring her after all, Chisaki mused aloud. 49 cursed himself for being so obvious. This is Eri, Chisaki continued, gesturing to the girl. She is an integral part of what we are building her, and I can't afford to have her killed. Your job is to protect her and keep her under control. She has attempted to run off in the past. Chisaki's eyes burned into his. That will not happen again. 49 waited. When it seemed that was all the man had to say, he jerked his head in a nod. Satisfied, Chisaki looked to Hirono. Take them to her room. Go over the rules and expectations. Sure, boss. Hirono gestured for the men escorting Eri to follow and led them away to another room. This one was far less comfortable. It contained a small sleeping mat and a desk with a few children's workbooks. The single shelf held what looked like 2 identical child-size white dresses and a hairbrush. The open door on the far wall showed a tiny bathroom with a sink, toilet, and shower. There are no windows. This is where you will be most of the time, Hirono announced. Men will stand guard outside. When Chisaki requires Eri's presence, you will escort her to and from the labs. Meals will be brought. You are expected to keep the space in Eri clean and presentable and to report if she tries anything. Understood. He was a babysitter. 49 could not imagine a job for which he was less qualified. Still, it could have been much worse. He nodded. Hirono frowned. Failure would be ... very unpleasant, he warned. And any displays like we saw earlier today will not be tolerated. You are lethal. I can appreciate that fact. But if you do not keep your bloodlust under control, Chisaki will rip you apart and put you back together. And then he'll do it again. 49 was silent. Hirono seemed to take this for agreement. Without another word, he stepped out and pulled the door shut. They were alone. 49 stared down at the frightened child who had backed herself into a corner, glossy red eyes staring at him. He needed to sort out his thoughts and figure out this shitshow. But first, he had to somehow communicate to this child that he meant her no harm. Moving slowly, 49 eased himself into a sitting position on the floor. Crimson eyes tracked his movements. Without the option of speech, 49 allowed his animal instinct to take the driver's seat. He tilted his head to reveal his throat, letting his wings drift gently open, not raised and threatening, but open and relaxed. The child's brow furrowed, confused, but less scared. 49 stayed put, letting her come to him. The exhaustion of the day caught up with him as he knelt, and before long he found himself leaning his head on his arms, blinking lazily. He had nearly drifted off when a small hand brushed his extended wing. He barely avoided lunging at the unexpected contact, but the small involuntary flinch still sent the child scrambling backward. He slumped to the ground again, revealing even more of his neck. The child paused her retreat. Can I? Her voice was the barest whisper. He nodded, extending his wings slowly in her direction. Tiny fingers brushed his feathers, and he repressed the shiver the contact sent through him. 49 couldn't remember a time anyone had touched his wings with kindness. Innocent wonder touched her expression as she traced the soft feathers. Out of ideas on how to communicate with her, 49 let her continue her exploration. When gentle fingers scratched at the spot where feathers melted into scales at his wing joint, 49 seconds' chest made a sound he didn't recognize, startling them both. Eri jerked her hand back, and they stared at each other wide-eyed. 49 seconds' eyebrows furrowed, and he gently nudged her with his wing to try again. Unsure, Eri hesitated before reaching for the same spot. After a moment, the rumble started again, and 49 seconds' eyes drooped. Something about the noise pushed his tiredness into true exhaustion. After a brief pause, Eri continued her motions. 49 fought to keep his eyes open. Soon, though, he drifted into sleep. None of these look familiar. Todoroki shook his head. The boy I saw was very distinctive. In addition to extensive mutations, he was green. None of these people are green. Aizawa frowned, and Hitoshi could see the exhaustion lining his eyes. Describe him to me. At the very least, if he is truly that distinct, we can run him through the database to try and get a name. Todoroki frowned. His mutations were odd. Not avian or reptilian but both. Dragon mutations are rare, but that's what it looked like. Hitoshi's eyebrows rose. Rare was an understatement. He had 4 wings, Todoroki continued. The bottom set were smaller than the upper, black and green. His hair was green too, as were his eyes. They also had reptilian characteristics, slitted pupils and nose clear, fangs, scales, and talons. A scar cut across his face. He was small though. Todoroki's frown deepened. Brutal and animalistic, but he was actually very light. He couldn't have been more than 56. Aizawa sighed through his nose as he jotted down Todoroki's observations. I see what you meant. That would be hard to miss. Hopefully that will make the task of finding him easier. He snapped the notebook shut. I'm going to run this through the system and see if we get any matches. Todoroki, Tsukachi may want you to speak to a sketch artist. Todoroki nodded, and Aizawa left, leaving them alone in the classroom. Hitoshi glanced out the window at the setting sun. What were you going to do after this? Homework, probably. Todoroki shrugged. I'm almost done, but there's no reason to put it off. Want to train with me instead? Hitoshi cracked his neck, slinging his book bag over his shoulder. With the licensing exam coming up, we've still got a lot of work to do coming up with our special moves. Heaven-piercing ice wall has been finished since before the sports festival, and it still leaves you with frostbite, Hitoshi pointed out. You need to work your left side too. I won't use my left side in combat. Yeah, I know, Hitoshi rolled his eyes. Do we really need to have the villainous Quirk's conversation again? Besides, you don't have to use it offensively, just use it enough to avoid becoming a popsicle. Todoroki glowered. I suppose that would be reasonable. Great, Hitoshi said, sarcasm dripping from the word. Let's hit the gym then. I want to get there before Bakugo destroys the place. Bakugo had already destroyed the place. In the middle of the wreckage was a grinning, unbreakable Kirishima, clearly having the time of his life. Kami on a cracker, Bakugo. Couldn't you leave some for the rest of us? The fuck are you talking about, eye bags? He stopped, caught in Hitoshi's quirk. Punch yourself in the face. Kirishima tried to grab Bakugo before his fist connected, but it was too late. Hitoshi cackled, already sprinting to the other side of the gym as Bakugo's enraged roar echoed off the walls. I will fucking end you. Bakugo screamed, explosions sounding as he propelled himself towards Hitoshi's fleeing figure. Glancing back, Hitoshi barely suppressed an unmanly squeak at the maniacal rage on his classmate's face. Todoroki, save me, he screamed, ducking the explosion aimed at his head. Kirishima laughed at him. Todoroki just watched the spectacle with a bored expression. You made your bed. Oh, now you understand colloquialisms. Hitoshi dodged a fist only to catch a foot to the ribcage. Stop talking and fight me. I am fighting you, asshole. With a roar, Bakugo let off an explosion, propelling himself through Hitoshi's guard and sending them both to the ground, Bakugo on top. Pinned, Hitoshi could only shut his eyes as Bakugo drew back his fist. Nothing happened. Hitoshi risked opening one eye to see Bakugo's fist mere centimeters from his nose. Your blocks are pathetic, Bakugo sneered. Hitoshi glared back, bucking to try and knock the other boy off him. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have freaking explosions increasing my speed and power. Bakugo's expression twisted. I don't want excuses, he spit. I want a decent fucking fight. He shoved off Hitoshi. Get the one with the tail to work with you. He doesn't suck half as bad and his quirk is a freaking tail. Leaving Hitoshi on the floor, he stalked back to Kirishima. That was nice of him. Hitoshi stared at Todoroki as he scraped himself off the floor. Did we just witness the same conversation? Todoroki shrugged. We would have had to pull him off you at the beginning of the year. Be grateful you transferred after he started therapy. Plus, he pointed you toward the best sparring partner he could. Ajiro is an extremely talented and disciplined martial artist. Besides, you started it, Todoroki added, almost an afterthought. Etoshi's cheeks pinked. Wasn't wrong. Let's work on our moves. Todoroki frowned. Does your quirk have a capability with which I'm unfamiliar? Etoshi grinned, pulling out a heavy black mask. Not quite, but the support department is going to make me absolutely lethal. Chisaki, who he'd heard referred to as Overhaul by his men, left them alone for a few days. In this time, Eri and 49 had built a tentative trust. To help overcome the language barrier, 49 had begun showing her some basic signs. These would also be helpful if they were ever in a situation where they needed to be quiet and discreet. After experimentation, 49 found that Eri knew some hiragana, and they were able to communicate that way. It wasn't perfect, but it let him teach her some signs like danger that were difficult to communicate nonverbally. The main concern was his shoulder. In his exploration of their tiny rooms, he'd found that the bathroom carried the barest of necessities, not extending to medical supplies. The inflammation had only increased after a few days untended, and if he had to guess, it was becoming infected. The commission, cruel as they might have been, had never fallen short on his medical care, so he was unsure what to look for in a wound left untreated long term. The door opened. 49 stood, placing Eri at his back. He wasn't overly concerned. It was about time for dinner. The man who entered wasn't carrying a tray. Overhaul wants her in the labs. 49 frowned. Labs. Hirono had mentioned those, saying it would be his responsibility to escort her to them when summoned. He glanced back at Eri, who seemed like she was trying not to cry. Still, there was little he could do to stop this from happening, and, if he tried, it was likely Overhaul would kill him, leaving Eri without even that little bit of protection. He extended his hand to the girl. She blinked back, the tears swimming in her crimson eyes, and carefully wrapped her fingers around his own. The man scoffed impatiently as they stepped into the hallway. This way. They were led to the level below, which seemed to be where most of the action was. The low-level thug pushed open double doors. It was clearly a lab. 2 people in white coats were pulling equipment from a metal cabinet, metal tools gleaming in the fluorescent lights. Chisaki's eyes fell to where their hands were joined. 49 seconds, fingers tightened. Eri, come here. Immediately, Eri released him, running toward Chisaki. 49 tensed as she moved away from him. He nodded toward a medical bench, equipped with straps and an adjustable back. Eri's shoulders hunched, but she climbed up obediently and let the doctors strap her in. 49 watched with a rising sense of alarm. When the female doctor lifted a large needle, he moved forward without a plan, the silent tears spilling down her face, making it impossible to stay still. The thug that had led them there caught his arm, yanking him to a halt. He couldn't suppress the gasp that escaped his mouth as agony ripped through his body at the jostled wound. Chisaki's eyes narrowed on his shoulder. It's injured, he said, voice sharp. Why wasn't I informed? His face was drawn in irritation, but at least the doctor had paused whatever they were planning to do to her. The man stalked over to them. 49 forced himself not to flinch as Overhaul tore his shirt, exposing the wound. The area around it was bright red and inflamed, clear yellowish liquid leaking from entry. Chisaki made a noise of disgust, muttering about filth and contamination. This will be a demonstration, Chisaki said, tugging off his glove. He placed his hand on 49 seconds' shoulder and pain exploded throughout his body. He choked on a scream as his arm disappeared in a flurry of red and rematerialized on his body. Dropping to his knees, 49 gagged, clutching the limb to his body. Chisaki tusked. Good as new. He crouched next to 49 seconds' trembling body. If anything happens to Eri, if you get in my way achieving my goal, I will unmake and remake you until you go insane. If you interfere with the doctors, I will do it to her and make you watch. His breathing was getting out of control. 49 forced a stiff nod. He understood. Chisaki stepped away, nodding to the doctor to continue. This time, 49 didn't move toward the girl, but he forced himself to hold her gaze. The procedure wasn't that bad. The doctors drew blood, too much blood, but nothing terrible. By the end, though, Eri was limp and pale, barely bleeding as the needle withdrew from her skin. Take her back to her room, Chisaki instructed. 49 stepped forward, nervously glancing at the man. When no one stopped him, he unstrapped the limp girl and lifted her into his arms. Eri didn't react to his touch. It was silent as he led the way back to their room, low-level guard trailing behind to lock them in. Violent tremors tore through his arms as 49 stared at the empty room. He sank to his knees on the sleeping mat, clutching Eri in his arms as he shifted, put his back to the wall with her in his arms. Dinner had been delivered while they were in Chisaki's labs, and he eyed the bottles of juice on the tray. For the blood loss, 49 looked down at the unconscious girl. He hated to wake her, but he didn't know if it was dangerous for her to sleep with her blood sugar so low. He tapped her forehead, shaking her lightly. When that did nothing, he let out a low, non-threatening growl and pressed the cool juice bottle to her neck. That did it, she gasped, bleary red eyes flying open. Eri blinked up at him, shaky hand rising to touch her neck. He opened the juice for her and pressed it into her hand. The girl frowned and shook her head, pushing it away. 49 took her hand and wrapped it around the bottle. Yes, he signed. Important. Danger. Aries frowned deepened as she tried to remember the signs. When she repeated them aloud questioningly, he nodded and repeated them. Her shoulders sagged, but she sipped at the bottle. Thank you, he signed. He managed to coax her to eat most of the tray. Honestly, he wasn't finding food terribly appealing either at the moment, but he forced himself to lead by example. When that was done, he set the tray aside and went to lay her down on the bed. She stopped him as he pulled away. Stay. He paused, staring at her. It wasn't like he could go anywhere. When she tugged him down, he understood. Carefully, he laid down, pulling her back to his chest. Tears pricked his eyes as her warmth soaked into him. And that low rumble started in his chest. 49 didn't miss the pleased squeal from the girl when she felt the rumble. Slowly, he relaxed with her in his arms, letting the horror of the day bleed away into sleep. Hitoshi couldn't believe the licensing exams were already here. Excitement and nerves blended into nausea as he stared at the building where his future would be decided. A little dramatic perhaps, but Hitoshi would be damned if he had to retake this test. Aizawa stood in front of the bus as they filed out, looking entirely done with the world. Hitoshi knew better though. The man would never admit it, but he loved Hitoshi's asshole classmates and was incredibly invested in their success. Hitoshi's thought process was interrupted by a woman with bright teal hair launching herself into his dad's arms. Hitoshi glowered as the woman loudly proclaimed that they were in love and proposed marriage. Damn Toshi, I've never seen you with such a killer glare, Kaminari whistled. Aizawa's eyes shot toward him before Hitoshi could rearrange his face, and the man stepped away from the crazy woman like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The woman looked between them. No way, Eraser, do you have a secret kid? She shrieked, mouth dropping open. She let out a boisterous laugh. He looks just like you, but how could you not tell your best friend and secret lover? You are neither. She laughed again. You're impossible, Eraser, that's what I like about you. All right, class. She clapped her hands at the Ketsubutsu students crowded behind her. Let's get to it. Bye, Eraser, she called as she skipped towards the entrance. I notice he didn't deny it, Todoroki said, eyeing him and Aizawa. You two do share insomnia and an obsession for coffee. Not to mention your capture scarves and mental quirks. Hitoshi rolled his eyes. Aizawa was his dad but not biologically. Eraser and brainwashing are hardly the same quirk. Todoroki's suspicious expression didn't change. Hitoshi huffed, still peeved by the whole situation. I'm going to register. You guys might want to deal with that, he said, nodding to where Bakugo was about to blow up some Shinsou students. Ida and Aizawa's heads swiveled toward the confrontation with identical expressions of alarm. Hitoshi left the shouts behind him as he speed-walked into the air conditioning. Quick footsteps trotted after him. Hey man, Kaminari nudged his arm, having caught up. You good? Hitoshi blew out a breath. Little stressed. I don't do well with the pressure of tests. Yeah, you're telling me, Kaminari grimaced. Still, I'd rather be doing this than a written test. Laughing quietly, Hitoshi slumped against the wall to watch the rest of their class trickle in. I believe that. How are the ADHD meds working out? Kaminari's perpetually wide grin brightened until looking at him was almost blinding. It's been great. Present Mike saved my life when he told me I should get tested. His expression turned dreamy. Last night I was watching this new show I've been obsessed with and then Kirishima reminded me that I had an English assignment due. And I just stumped. He turned to Hitoshi, eyes wide with wonder. I just turned off the TV and focused on my homework. That's never happened in my life. Unable to resist, Hitoshi ruffled Kaminari's hair like he would have one of his younger foster siblings. That's great, Kami. I'm glad they're helping. Kaminari beamed at him, not at all displeased to be pet like a dog. Over Kaminari's head, Hitoshi saw the rest of the class enter the building, including a smoking Bakugo wrapped in Aizawa's scarf. He rolled his eyes, and Kaminari giggled when he followed Hitoshi's gaze. Let's get this over with, Hitoshi sighed. Kaminari pumped a fist. We're gonna crush it. Hitoshi's mouth quirked at the other's enthusiasm, and he followed the rambunctious teen, feeling a bit better about the whole situation. Fucking shit, Hitoshi chanted as he dove behind a boulder to escape the torrent of balls aimed at his class. Language, not the time, Ida, he screamed back. Before they could be totally creamed, Todoroki stomped his foot, sending an ice wall shooting up to shield them from what was sure to be a massacre. We're too big a target, Uraraka said, frowning. We need to split up. Shouldn't we stay together since we're obviously being targeted? Ida said. Hitoshi shook his head. No, she's right. We need to split them up. Groups of 3 and 4 so that it's defensible but not an easy target. Sounds of agreement rang out, and the class split up. Bakugo, Kirishima, and Kaminari had already split at the beginning, leaving the rest of them scrambling. Hitoshi found himself paired with Zero and Jiru. All right, he said as they ducked into one of the buildings Jiru said was unoccupied. We're not a powerhouse team. I think we can all admit that, yeah? They nodded even though Jiru looking a little miffed. Right, but I think this could actually work, he said. Jiru, you can find targets and warn us when people are coming. Zero, you and I can subdue them. If you can think of any traps to set with your tape, that's great, and I'll get them to talk. We can do this, he said, unusually optimistic. The other two nodded, Zero grinning. I know exactly what to do. It worked absurdly well, keeping Jiru purely as a scout allowed her to focus on the sounds around them, giving them a warning system long before anyone became a threat. And between Zero's tape and Hitoshi's voice changer, they were able to subdue the groups they came across with relative ease. The three grinned at each other as their targets fell off. I hope the others made it, Zero said, glancing around as they made their way to the exit. When they passed through the doors, Hitoshi had to suppress a grin when he saw most of his class gathered together. Kaminari and Kirishima cheered at the sight of them. Who's left? Hitoshi asked. Just Ida and Aoyama, Uraraka said, frowning at the doors. They better hurry up, the spots are almost filled. Just then the announcement sounded. And 100 people, all the spots are filled up. Oh no, Uraraka said, eyes wide. Do you think? Ada and Aoyama pushed through the doors. Yes, she screamed, running forward to grab Ida's arm. I never doubted you. Mina and Kaminari were jumping around too. We all made it. Hitoshi wondered what Aizawa's face looked like, knowing that his entire first-year class passed. We still have to pass the second half. Mina stuck her tongue out at him. Don't be a party pooper. We're gonna murder that test. You spend too much time with Bakugo. She paused, considering his words. That did sound like something Blasty would say. Hey, you wanna go, Raccoon Eyes? The Baka squad laughed, dogpiling a raging Bakugo. Hitoshi huffed, hiding his amusement. He nudged Todoroki. We should get water. I don't know how long of a break they're going to give us. The teen nodded, face blank as he observed the chaos. As they made their way toward the water fountains, an enormous Shinsou student with a large bruise on his forehead slammed his shoulder into Todoroki's. What's your problem? Hitoshi snapped, steadying Todoroki. The student glared at Todoroki, whose icy expression didn't change. Heroics is no place for those without passion. If UA rewards those like you, I'm glad I turned down my acceptance. Without waiting for a response, the teen continued striding down the hall. Hitoshi's brow furrowed. What was that about? Someone who has a problem with my father and decided to take it out on me. Hitoshi's gaze swung to Todoroki's closed expression. Has he given you a problem before? Todoroki shrugged, moving towards the fountains again. Before the exam started, Hitoshi's jaw clenched. Do me a favor and sock him if he comes at you again. The last thing you need is other people giving you shit about that flaming trash can. Todoroki's expression didn't change, but his shoulders relaxed. I'll take that into consideration. They got their water in comfortable silence. Before long, it was time for the second part of the exam to start. I can help. Hitoshi stopped the girl who was organizing the men's station. I can help keep people calm. She gave him a sharp nod. I'll have them send the hysterical victims your way. That, she pointed to one of 3 setups, is Section B. Stay there so I know where you are. Got it. He headed toward the spot she'd indicated. Already, other students were carrying the actors out of the wreckage. As promised, he was met with tears and hysterics. Using his quirk, he calmed the actors while treating their wounds. He ignored the headache that was building after only a few minutes. Picking up and dropping control like this was a strain. But he pushed through, knowing that his quirk wasn't suited to moving and searching through rubble. Everything started to blur together until explosions broke through the blur. Hitoshi's head whipped around. Villains. Gang Orca led a menacing crowd of villains, and they were aiming right for the medical stations. Hitoshi hesitated, seeing Todoroki and that kid from the hallway running to intercept them. Despite their arguments, both students were enormously powerful. The Shinsou student appearing to have a quirk that controlled the air itself. Surely they can handle it. Then he saw Shinsou's wind divert Todoroki's fire, and his mouth dropped open as they started screaming at each other, ignoring the villains completely. He was moving before he could think. What the hell are you doing? He screamed. Todoroki paused, whipping his angry gaze toward Hitoshi. You can't fight each other when there are villains in front of you, he said. He turned to Gang Orca, painting a perplexed expression on his face. Can you believe these two? Indeed, you should focus on the threat, Gang Orca began before his eyes glazed over. Attack your men and don't get injured, Hitoshi ordered, his headache spiking. The man was fighting him, Todoroki. He said through gritted teeth, put your shit aside and help me. I can't focus on villains coming at me while I'm controlling him. Understood. Through blurry vision, Hitoshi saw Todoroki move in front of him. When had he fallen to his knees? He heard villains shouting and felt the air grow colder as Todoroki shielded him from an attack. But he couldn't focus on anything besides the pain in his head and maintaining the control. Time passed in a blur before he felt Todoroki's hand on his shoulder. Shinsou, Todoroki said, shaking him lightly. It's over, the exam's done. Release the control. Hitoshi severed the thread, hands clutching his head. He barely managed to rip his mask down before he puked. He okay. Hands guided him upright, and Hitoshi groaned. Todoroki slung his arm over their shoulders, and together they stumbled out of the arena. Todoroki set him on a bench and disappeared. Hitoshi couldn't bear the thought of opening his eyes to see where he went. Minutes later, Todoroki returned. Here, he murmured, placing a damp washcloth over Hitoshi's eyes, cooled with his quirk. Hitoshi groaned again, hoping to convey his gratitude. His head felt marginally better by the time everyone else poured through the doors to the arena, whooping. Hitoshi cracked open an eye, shifting the cloth to his forehead. Everyone passed. Did he pass? Kaminari bounded over, grinning. Even through his excitement, he noticed Hitoshi's predicament and lowered his volume. Yeah, everyone except Bakugo and Todoroki. Todoroki stiffened beside him. Kaminari's face became a mask of horror. You didn't know. Shit, sorry Todabro. It's fine, Todoroki dismissed. It's my own fault for letting personal grudges interfere with my performance. Why Bakugo? Hitoshi asked, ignoring the grin that wanted to spread over his face. He passed. Kaminari looked like he was fighting a laugh. He yelled at the victims. Like, a lot. Hitoshi snorted, then regretted it as his headache spiked. Of course he did. Aizawa stepped into the hallway, observed the chaos, and appeared to consider walking back out, but Mina spotted him. Sensei, she squealed. We passed. I'm aware. The girl bounced in place, undeterred. Aw, don't be like that. I know you're proud of us. Is that so? His deadpan expression didn't change as he scanned the group, lingering on Hitoshi's slumped form for half a second longer. Everyone get on the bus. If you're not there in 3 minutes, I'll leave you here. He walked off. He's so proud of us, Mina grinned. He's also not bluffing about leaving us. Hitoshi peeled himself off the bench, not contradicting her. Thank you, he said to Todoroki. The other teen nodded distractedly, gaze far off. Hitoshi closed his eyes as he followed the sound of Ida's shouting toward their bus. He couldn't wait to fall into bed. When they cut her open to scrape out bone marrow instead of blood, 49 couldn't restrain himself. A haze fell over him, screaming at him to protect. He lunged at the doctor, snatching the scalpel out of his hands and stabbing it into the man's chest. In the minutes it took Chisaki to arrive, 49 mauled the doctors and guard and ripped Eri out of the straps. Chisaki pushed through the doors just as 49 stepped towards them, determined to get Eri out of there. He had a single second to recognize the remote in the man's hand to thrust Eri away from him before electricity arced through his body. A choked cry escaped him as he crumpled next to Eri, body seizing uncontrollably. When it stopped, he could only stare, frozen, as Overhaul reached a bare hand out to Eri. I warned you, is all he said before his hand dropped onto her head, and she became red mist. It was over in a second before she returned, sobbing but whole. But 49 couldn't stop the vomit that sprayed from his mouth in choked sobs. That image would forever be imprinted in his memory. Her blood was tacky on his face. He was kept from Eri after that. In a daze, 49 stumbled after Kurono, held up by the man's hand on his bicep, and thrust into the mudroom where he was hosed down and sterilized. Afterward, Kurono threw him into a bare room identical to Eri's but lacking any furnishing. Days passed without food, and he drank from the sink when he could muster the motivation. Eventually, the door opened, and Chisaki stepped through. 49 didn't move from his spot on the floor. Chisaki's shiny leather shoes squeaked as he lowered himself into a crouch. Yellow eyes assessed him, and 49 didn't have to fake the glazed, broken expression on his face. We understand each other now. Chisaki stood. Take him back to her room, he told the guard, walking away. 49 vaguely recognized that this was the first time Chisaki had referred to him as a person. Maybe his suffering was humanizing. The guard dragged him upright, and he swayed, weak from hunger. They stopped at the other end of the hall. She was so close this whole time. 49 fell to his knees when the guard shoved him inside. Eri scrambled to her feet, eyes wide and already crying at the sight of him. She threw herself into his chest, wrapping her arms around his neck. They were both shaking. Eventually, he pulled back, swallowing his tears. I'm sorry, he signed, over and over again. I'm so sorry. She sobbed again and pushed his hand aside to cling to his chest again. They fell sideways onto the sleeping mat, and he clutched her to his chest. Terror crept through him as he held the child. Chisaki had done something the commission never could. He'd accidentally given 49 something to care about. The implications doused him in cold fear. For the first time in his life, he had something to lose. They tentatively resumed their routine the next day. 49 felt a little steadier after a night's sleep, and he actually received food in the morning. The pair hunched over one of Eri's workbooks, working through the problems together. 49 had received an exceptional education from the commission, but their limited ability to communicate made it difficult for him to teach. That evening, the door swung open. 49 took his typical defensive stance, but Kurono only glanced over him dismissively. Come with me. 49 swallowed but nodded, reaching for Eri's hand. No, Kurono said, just you. 49 froze. Why would they separate them? Were they going to do something to Eri? His pulse skyrocketed until it rushed in his ears. Kurono sighed, taking pity on him. We're not doing anything to the kid. Boss wants you to train so you don't become useless. 49 blinked. That made sense. Giving Yuri a reassuring smile, he walked out, keeping Kurono in his sight. The man took him to a large room with padded mats and equipment. He hadn't been lying. He eyed the men huddled throughout the room warily. Kurono ignored them. Stretch and go through whatever routine you have. We'll spar afterward. 49 hesitated, off balance in this situation. But eventually he shrugged and dropped into a lunge. Honestly, it sucked being stuck in a 10x10 room with a 6-year-old for days on end. Sit-ups and push-ups could only get one so far. He worked his way through most of the equipment in the room, frowning at his loss of progress. It wasn't extensive, but his maxes and endurance had definitely dropped. Finishing, he wiped the sweat off his face with the hem of his t-shirt. Kurono paused where he was working out. Ready? 49 nodded. The man rolled off the bench, scraping back his sweat-slick hair. Let's do this. Cheering and boos echoed through the room, depending on who they had bet on. 49 panted. Not even sure how many opponents he had fought at this point. He hadn't lost yet, although Kurono hadn't stepped into the ring like he'd thought he would. Many of the bystanders had started betting on how or when he'd win rather than if he'd win. 49 stumbled as a sudden hush fell over the room. He followed his opponent's gaze toward the door. Chisaki observed the scene. The room held its breath, but Chisaki merely looked at Kurono and said, "They'll meet us in a couple hours. Put him back with Yuri and chose a couple men to come with us." "Sure thing, boss." Kurono gestured to 49, and he stepped forward, grabbing his discarded shirt. 49 seconds panting was the only sound as they moved through the hallways. Kurono barely spared him a glance as he dropped him off in Yuri's room and disappeared. The girl stared at him, wide-eyed with concern at the sight of his blood-splattered, sweaty body. He waved off her concern, smiling as reassuringly as he could with a split lip and blood-stained teeth. When she relaxed slightly, he stepped into the shower, sighing as the hot water hit his body. Even the commission hadn't afforded him that luxury. He didn't linger though, not wanting to leave Yuri alone for too long. His various aches and pains were actually refreshingly familiar as he dressed and stepped back into the gym refreshed. 49 had missed training. When he saw Yuri's timid glance at his visible bruises, he opened his arms, and she rushed into them. He hugged the girl, that now familiar rumble starting in his chest. He sat on the sleeping mat with her cuddled against him and pulled her worksheet towards them. Glancing over her work, he relaxed at the comfortable familiarity. These moments ... they weren't so bad. Mirio wiped the floor with them. It wasn't even an exaggeration. He'd kicked Aoyama so hard in the chest that the teenager had skidded the length of the room, only stopping when he struck a cowering Koda. Hitoshi managed to duck his first blow before being struck in the gut hard enough that he'd only barely managed to avoid puking on the older student. Now the blonde stood in the middle of the room, surveying the crumpled teenagers with a bright grin. "Great job, everyone." "So Opus," Kaminari groaned. Hitoshi silently agreed. Mirio's permeation combined with whatever that yellowish lighting around him was made the teen nearly indestructible. Aizawa swept his gaze over them. "Everyone up. You have English in 5 minutes." Groans filled the room as they dragged themselves to their feet. "Sadist," Hitoshi muttered as he passed his father in the doorway. If Aizawa hid a smirk in his capture scarf, no one could say. Hitoshi slumped behind his desk, eyeing the paper in front of him. Work studies. Who did he want to work with? Underground heroes rarely took work study students. He could work with a limelight hero. Even if it wasn't what he wanted to do, he'd still learn something. His eyes drifted to the front of the class with a thoughtful frown. Maybe there was another option. "You want to be my work-study student?" Aizawa stared at him across the table. "Why?" Hitoshi huffed. "Underground heroes don't usually take work-study students, which limits my options. I could go for a limelight hero, but that's not what I'm looking to do. You do what I want to do. You're a teacher, so you know how to be a mentor, and we know we work together well." Aizawa frowned. "This could be an opportunity for you to expand your horizons. You can shadow me on patrol anytime." Hitoshi grimaced. "I know it seems like a waste, but I've really thought about it. There's no one else I want to work with." Aizawa studied him in silence for long enough that Hitoshi had to stop himself from squirming in his seat. Whatever Aizawa was looking for, he must have found it because he sighed. "Fine. You're going to work though," he warned. "It's going to be long hours that are not compatible with school, no glory, and frankly, hell." Hitoshi grinned. "I expected nothing less. Why are we being brought in on a case with limelight heroes?" Aizawa barely spared him a glance. "Underground heroes often collaborate with limelight heroes, especially on big cases like this. Additionally, several of your classmates are involved, making me an ideal choice to ensure none of you do something stupid and get yourselves killed." Hitoshi hummed. "Who's Sir Night-Eye?" All Might's old sidekick. Aizawa shot him an unimpressed glance as they stepped off the train and set off at a brisk pace. "You should know that." Hitoshi shrugged. "I'm pickier than most about which heroes I geek out over." "Keep your mouth shut in here," Aizawa warned as they entered the agency. It was a cold, impersonal space, and Hitoshi barely suppressed a shiver. Night-Eye is not a patient man, and I highly doubt he'll be pleased to have so many teenagers involved in his big case. Got it. Without preamble, Aizawa shoved open the door to the conference room and stepped inside. Hitoshi followed, gaze bouncing over the faces present. Kirishima, Uraraka, Asui, Myro, Nejire, and Amajiki stood with their mentors, Night-Eye, Ryukyu, and Fat Gum. Kirishima looked up as they entered, a grin breaking over his face as he walked toward them. Hey Shinsou, sensei, he greeted. I didn't know you guys would be here. Because this meeting was classified, Aizawa said, deadpan. Kirishima's smile didn't falter, and he nudged Hitoshi. Exciting to be working together, right? Before Hitoshi could respond, Night-Eye flicked the lights to get everyone's attention. Right, now that we're all here, he said. And Hitoshi swore the man sent Aizawa an irritated glare. New information has surfaced that has made this case urgent. Fat Gum, he nodded to the man. And his work-study students encountered a new drug linked to Trigger. As we know, the Shy Hasekai have been involved in the distribution of Trigger. However, Sun Eater was struck with a bullet containing a substance that not only suppressed his quirk factor for several hours, but, upon examination from medical professionals, began to destroy it. While this current iteration of the drug appears to be temporary, we can only assume that a permanent version either exists or is being developed. Whispers filled the room, fear palpable at the thought of Quirk destroying bullets. Night-Eye let them absorb the information for a moment before he resumed speaking. Additionally, Eraserhead brought me information that suggests that the Shy Hasekai case I've been working on and the HPSC case that he was following up on are now connected. Night-Eye spoke over the whispers this time. While searching for one of the HPSC's missing assets, Eraserhead located and interrogated the asset's former handler who revealed that he had sold the boy to the Shy Hasekai. Hitoshi's eyes widened, and his head whipped around to stare at his father's impassive face. Night-Eye continued. In the course of the interrogation, the man revealed that he believed the asset was purchased with the intent to use him as a bodyguard for a younger child. From conversation with Chisaki Kai, the handler believed this child was integral to Overhaul's plans, which we can assume are the manufacturing and distribution of the quirk-destroying drug. Examination of the bullet recovered by Fat Gum on the scene revealed that the bullets contain human blood and tissue. We are operating under the assumption that this child is being used to manufacture the bullets. Hitoshi's classmates stared at the man in horror, and he doubted his face was any better. Night-Eye adjusted his glasses. Recovery of this child is the top priority. We can no longer afford to sit back for the perfect time. Children. Hitoshi wasn't even aware he spoke until the stairs swiveled to face him. Excuse me, Night-Eye said, voice cool. Hitoshi swallowed. You said recovery of the child. But there are 2 children being held captive by Overhaul that we know of. You keep talking about assets and purchases as if he's not a person. But we have to rescue him too. Speaking of children, Rocklock said, looking him and his classmates over in disdain. What are they even doing here? We don't have time to discuss semantics or coddle high schoolers. Aizawa put a hand on his shoulder, stopping the retort on Hitoshi's lips. My students are more than capable of contributing to this conversation. Not only does Mind Jack raise an extremely relevant point about our priorities in this mission, he was involved in bringing us the information that allowed the raid on the HPSC facility, making him more knowledgeable than most about the asset you're all dismissing so casually. Fat Gum nodded. Thank you for your input, Mind Jack. You're correct to point out that we need to save both children. Thankfully, if the information we received is correct, they should be in the same place. Bodyguards don't usually stray far from their charge. Night-Eye frowned but didn't object as the other heroes around the room voiced their agreement. That's settled. Direct your attention to the screen behind me where basic coordination is laid out. Bro, you totally called Sir Night-Eye out, so manly. Hitoshi scrubbed his hands over his face. More like stupid. They were ready to kick us out before Aizawa spoke up. Yeah, that Rocklock guy kinda sucks. Uraraka frowned. But you were absolutely right to speak up. It's not that kid's fault he got caught up in all this, and it was wrong for everyone to just dismiss that he needs saving too. Hitoshi grunted. Are you guys headed back to UA after this? I am, Kiro, Asui said. I'm going to need time to process all this. The others nodded in agreement. Kirishima's bright grin faltered. This is heavier than anything I thought we'd be dealing with in our first year. And we can't talk to anyone about it, Uraraka added with a frown. Hitoshi sighed. Underground heroics deals with the grittier stuff often, so I expected that, but drugs, human trafficking, human experimentation. He swallowed. Kirishima has a point. That can't be normal for first years. It's not. They whirled to find Aizawa standing behind them, face tucked into his capture weapon. This case is an extremely unusual one, and if any of you don't feel like you can handle it, you need to speak up now. They straightened with teenage outrage, and he lifted a hand to stop the torrent of objections. That wasn't a judgment. These are difficult topics, and you as first years have not yet received training on how to handle them. admitting that is not weakness. Their collective indignation subsided. I want to help, Hitoshi said, voice soft. The others looked between each other before each nodded in agreement. Aizawa sighed. Okay then, Hound Dog will be informed of your involvement though. If any of you feel like you would benefit from counseling, he will be prepared. Because of his status as a therapist, you will be able to discuss the case with him. Uraraka blew out a breath. Thank you, sensei. He nodded. I've spoken with your mentors. You're all free to leave for the day. And the last train leaves in 10 minutes, so we should get moving. As he walked with his classmates, Hitoshi couldn't help but feel a little better to not be doing this alone. They'd all gotten the call. It was time. The walls shuddering woke him from his midday nap. He shot upright, immediately locating Uri. She sat frozen at her desk, but when the walls shuddered again, she shot into his arms. He pulled her tight, ears straining to hear what was going on. Was it an earthquake? The yells he could barely hear sounded more angry than surprised or frightened, leading him to believe they were under attack. 49 cursed his lack of weapons, setting Uri in the corner and motioning for her to stay. He pounded on the door. To his shock, it swung open, and he found himself eye to eye with Chisaki. He scrambled backward, involuntary fear icing his veins. Hirono stood behind him. Get Uri and follow me, Chisaki ordered. 49 scrambled to obey. The rage in Chisaki's voice was lethal. He picked the girl up, wrapping her legs around his waist, and followed the men into the hallway. The yelling was louder here, but Chisaki was leading them away from it all. Hirono's phone is pressed to his ear. They're heading down, he relayed to Overhaul. They seem to be targeting the basement, although Mimic is holding them off. How did they know? Chisaki hissed. It should have taken the heroes weeks longer to figure out about Uri. 49 nearly tripped, holding Uri tighter. Heroes were here, looking for Uri. Hope warred with unease. On one hand, this could be her opportunity to escape Overhaul. On the other, 49 hadn't experienced any kindness at the hands of the Commission and their heroes, although the raid on the HPSC facility left him a bit confused as to whether they were on the same side or not. Keep up, Chisaki barked. They hurried through the hallways away from the sounds of conflict. Hirono's ear was still glued to his phone, occasionally barking instructions and relaying information to Overhaul. 49 seconds mind whirled, creating and discarding ideas, each more desperate than the last, when a flash of yellow and red flew by him and Uri like a bullet and struck Chisaki. The man stumbled backward, a boot print on his cheek. 49 scrambled to put distance between them and the fight as Overhaul scrubbed at his dirtied cheek frantically, cursing the hero for the filth. The hero was young, 49 saw with a sinking dread. Young and alone. The boy kept calling out encouragement to Uri, and 49 wanted to kick him for not focusing on the fight. Should he run with Uri? But Chisaki still held the control to his collar. Even if they slipped in a way unnoticed, Chisaki would activate it eventually, and then Uri would be on her own. He set the girl down, peeling her off his chest. I'm sorry, he signed, memorizing her face. Go with Hero. Run when I give the signal. She shook her head frantically, red eyes swimming. He stopped her. It'll be okay. Promise me, little dragon. She cried harder but nodded. Promise, she whispered, swallowing the lump in his throat. He yanked her into a tight hug before pulling back and forcing himself to turn away. The young hero was holding up surprisingly well, but as 49 watched, Overhaul crouched, hand hovering over the ground. The ground began to disassemble itself. 49 caught a brief glimpse of the hero's shocked expression before he slammed into the man's chest, hurling him backward out of the way. Chisaki would see his interference. There was no time to waste. He vanished, using his wings to propel us toward Chisaki just as the man pulled the control from his jacket. 49 raked his talons over the man's wrist, and his hand spasmed, dropping the remote. 49 snatched it, barely dodging the as that hair that shot at him from Kirono as the man joined the fight. 49 kicked Chisaki in the face hard enough to send the man to the ground before shooting into the air, out of reach. Relief flooded him as he saw the blonde hero kneeling next to Uri. Her mouth dropped open at the sight of him in the air, and she frantically pointed the hero to him. 49 had seconds before the fight resumed. Take Uri, he signed frantically. Overhaul was standing up. Run now while I keep him distracted. He missed the hero's response as a wave of spikes erupted from the ground, aiming at him, hurling himself to the side. 49 held back a scream as he slammed into the wall, one of his wings crumpling on impact and sending him sliding to the ground. He had no time to recover before Kirono tackled him from the side. He barely had time to orient himself before the man punched him in the face, blows raining down too quickly for him to move, to think. Something in his face cracked, and he choked on the blood sliding down his throat. Where was Chisaki? 49 summoned strength he didn't long he had and bucked, twisting to switch their positions. He managed to break Kirono's nose before Chisaki's hand descended over his face. There was no time to dodge. He closed his eyes, and nothing happened. The three of them paused in mutual confusion before 49 threw himself backward out of reach. Uri and the hero were gone, and in their place were two older men, one with floating black hair and red eyes, the other in a crisp suit and green hair. Eraser, his mind supplied. It was the only thing that made sense. The man with the glowing eyes could erase quirks. 49 felt the inappropriate urge to laugh. All this work Chisaki had put into quirk erasing drugs, and this man could do it naturally. There was undoubtedly a time limit though. He couldn't afford to waste the opportunity. 49 lunged, dodging Kurono to tackle the currently quirkless Chisaki. Without having to maintain a distance fight, 49 grinned, finally able to bloody the man. With brutal efficiency, 49 tore and bit and broke bones, and Chisaki didn't stand a chance. He lunged at the man's exposed throat, fangs bared to rip into the monster. Electricity exploded throughout his body. 49 screamed, convulsing. Panicked voices sounded in the background, and a brief scuffle before the surge cut off, leaving him twitching and gasping beside an unconscious Chisaki. "Kid, hey kid, look at me." A blur of dark hair swam in front of him. His muscles spasmed, and 49 had no control as his eyes slid shut, leaving him in darkness. The frantic voices faded and then he was gone. Itoshi never made it past the first floor. The compound was huge, and it seemed there were a dozen men hiding in every corner. Kirishima and Amajiki had run off with Fat Gum, and Aizawa with Night Eye, and then somehow it was just him and Rocklock, and neither of them were thrilled with the situation. Then Rocklock had gotten himself stabbed by Toga of all people, and he'd barely managed to fight her off before Mirio came hurtling through the halls with a tiny blonde girl in his arms. Taking advantage of his distraction, Toga had managed to slash a thin line across his chest and scramble away through the maze of hallways. Cursing, Hitoshi let her go to focus on the victim. "There are ambulances outside," he said. "Give me Eri, I can't carry Rocklock." Mirio nodded, handing him the girl. She trembled, and Hitoshi gave her an awkward smile. "How are you holding up?" he asked, like an idiot. She clutched at his shirt as they jogged towards the entrance, slowed by Rocklock's weight. Thankfully, the halls were pretty clear at this point. "He saved me," came a tiny voice near his chest. Hitoshi glanced down. "He sure did. Lemillion is a great hero." She shook her head vigorously. No, she made a gesture with her hands, and Hitoshi blinked. "Was that sign language for dragon?" "Saved me. You have to save him." Mirio stumbled. "You mean the other kid?" His face was a picture of guilt. "I'm sorry, kid. I swear I sent people to help him. But I had to focus on getting you out." "You saw the other kid?" "Midoriya." Aizawa had found a match in the databases with Todoroki's help. "Midoriya Izuku." He held off Chisaki. "Told me to grab her and run." Mirio clenched his jaw. "I sent Eraserhead and Sir Night Eye after them." Mirio took a deep breath and forced a beaming smile at the little girl. "They'll save him for sure." The girl looked dazed, and before either of them could respond, they stepped out of the house and were blinded by sunlight. Eri looked overwhelmed, red eyes squinting but refusing to close as they darted over the chaos. Heroes and police officers wrangled villains into transport vehicles, and ambulances with flashing lights were treating a small horde. When Itoshi went to drop Eri with the paramedics, she grabbed his shirt. "You want me to stay?" He blinked at her tiny nod. He hadn't done anything to earn the kid's trust. He glanced back reluctantly at the house, wanting to find Aizawa. "I'll go back in," Mirio said, glancing between the two. "You stay with her." Itoshi swallowed, but Eri was his priority right now. He gave a short nod, and Mirio disappeared into the throng. The paramedics looking her over looked ill at the multitude of what looked like old surgical scars, but there weren't any fresh wounds for them to treat. Itoshi's brow furrowed. "Why didn't you want Lemillion to stay with you?" Eri peeked up at him, hands still wrapped around his shirt. He realized that he'd begun petting her unconsciously, and she was leaning into the touch like a cat. He blinked when he realized she was even letting out a small vibration, like a purr. That was ... odd. He left. She made the sign for dragon again. Itoshi couldn't think of anything to say to that. He was sure Mirio had done the best he could in the situation, but there was no good way to explain to a 6-year-old that her life had been prioritized over her protectors. He was racking his brain to come up with something. Anything to say when his father appeared in the entrance of the compound, a limp figure in his arms. Eri saw them too, lunging forward with a wordless cry. He held her back, unsure if the body Aizawa was carrying was alive or not. She didn't need to see that. Itoshi swallowed bile. He didn't want to see that. But his father jogged over to them, calling for the paramedics. Hitoshi's eyes widened as he caught a good look at the kid. His face was, for lack of a better word, brutalized. Bruising covered nearly every inch. He had 2 black eyes and a broken nose and a laceration across his cheekbone where the skin had split from the force of the blows. The skin around the collar on his neck was burned and bubbling and looked incredibly painful. Eri sobbed, scrambling to get closer as the paramedics swarmed him. "The collar discharges electricity," his father told them, expression tight. "It was active for at least 30 seconds before I manages to get control of the remote. Everything else that I know of is blunt trauma." A shock collar. Itoshi felt sick. and his distraction allowed Eri to tear herself out of his arms. She threw herself over the kid's legs, sobbing. Hitoshi cursed and went to pull her off. He froze. She was glowing. Everyone in the vicinity paused, staring. Hitoshi noticed something then. The kid's wounds were closing. His mouth fell open, and Aizawa's gaze darted to see what Hitoshi was seeing. Bruises disappeared like they'd never been there in the first place, the gruesome burns smoothing into unmarked skin. It would have been a relief if Eri wasn't so clearly terrified. No, don't disappear, she sobbed, clutching at the glowing horn on her forehead. I'm sorry. The kid was completely healed. Eri was still glowing. Hitoshi and Aizawa shared a concerned glance before Aizawa's eyes glowed red, and Eri slumped over the other kid, unconscious. One of the paramedics said, "We should still get these two to a hospital." Aizawa nodded. "I'll come with you in case her quirk activates again." I don't know what she was so scared of, but I don't like the idea that she can make people disappear. What about Chisaki? Naita and Lemillion should be bringing them out soon. They were subdued and in quirk-suppressing cuffs when I left. Hitoshi nodded. Can I come? The paramedics looked like they were going to argue when he added, "She seems comfortable with me. I don't want her waking up in a strange place without anyone she recognizes." Aizawa nodded. Get in. 49 was in suspiciously little pain. Had Chisaki reset him? His heartbeat picked up at the thought. While the process left him physically healed, he always returned feeling a little less himself, like his limbs had been replaced with someone else's. Although that fear might have had something to do with when he saw Chisaki experimenting with that concept on two of his men. A beeping monitor picked up on the increase in his pulse, and he squeezed his eyes tighter shut before forcing them open with a sharp inhale. White walls. He squinted against the brightness of sunlight. 49 seconds brow furrowed as he examined the room. None of Chisaki's labs were above ground. Eri, where's Eri? He jolted upright, only to be yanked back by the straps on his wrists. And wasn't that familiar? A sour taste filled his mouth as venom leaked from his fangs in response to the adrenaline coursing through him. He needed to get out of here and find Eri. Chisaki's labs weren't above ground, which meant they were somewhere else. Which meant 49 froze as he remembered. Heroes, fighting Chisaki, losing the remote to the collar in pain. They'd gotten away. But that just meant they were in the hands of the heroes. And while 49 had made that sacrifice to get away from Chisaki, that didn't mean he was willing to leave Eri to become what he had been. Killer. His nostrils flared, and he steeled himself. Bracing the cuff around his left wrist with his feet, he tore his hand out of the cuff. He bit his tongue against a cry as something in his hand snapped. Thankfully, the cuffs were padded, so the abrasions were minor. He undid the other cuff more cautiously. He needed to keep at least one hand functional. 49 rolled out of the bed, landing in a crouch with his injured hand cradled to his chest. He froze as the door handle turned. Violet and Viridian eyes met. Hitoshi stepped away from Eri's bedside when the caffeine cravings hit. Hospital coffee left a lot to be desired, but he still melted when the first sip hit the back of his throat. Focused on the cup cradled in his hands, he wandered aimlessly through the halls, enjoying stretching his legs after sitting next to the girl's bed for hours. His eyes landed on the door to the other kid, Midoriya. He frowned when he noticed no one standing outside it. Hadn't his dad said that they were keeping eyes on him at all times? From what little Hitoshi knew, the boy was a highly trained, extremely traumatized child soldier who likely wouldn't react well to waking up in a strange place. Before he thought it through, Hitoshi's feet carried him through the door. He froze at the scene that greeted him. Midoriya was awake. Not only that, but he'd apparently ripped himself out of the restraints Hitoshi hadn't realized they were planning to use, and his hand looked fucked up. Glowing green eyes stared into his soul. "You," Hitoshi finally managed to choke out. "You're awake." He glanced back into the hallway, foot easing out of the room. "Let me just get." An animalistic snarl of warning ripped through the room, and he froze. "You don't want me to get anyone?" he asked, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Suspicious green eyes scrutinized him before slowly, Midoriya shook his head. This is a bad idea, Hitoshi thought. It didn't stop him from stepping fully inside the room and letting the door swing shut behind him. They stared at each other for another minute, and Hitoshi could feel the awkwardness making him antsy. Goddamn, was he supposed to make conversation? He just wanted coffee. "So," he ventured, "do you want me to call you Midoriya or Izuku?" Those glowing eyes drilled into his soul, a slight movement in them making him blink. Was that a nictating membrane? So cool. Hitoshi had always been intrigued by mutation quirks. Talon-tipped hands raised, and Hitoshi had a moment of panic before he realized that he recognized the movements. Right, Eri had used sign language briefly too. She could obviously speak, but Hitoshi had yet to hear anything resembling Japanese from the boy. Was he mute? He focused on the movements, brow furrowing. 49. 49 what? Midoriya frowned, movements becoming sharper. The 49. Hitoshi blinked, feeling vaguely ill. Your name is 49. At the other boy's nod, he shook his head. No, it's not, he said, gently. Your name is Midoriya Izuku. Why would your name be a number? Midoriya lifted his hands again before faltering. Assets have numbers. People have names. Hitoshi's mouth opened to reply when the door flew open, nearly clipping him. In a blur of green, Hitoshi found himself on the other side of the room, talons grazing his neck and a warm body pressed against his back. Aizawa stood in the doorway, eyes glowing and hand on his scarf. Wait, Hitoshi croaked, ignoring the way the claws at his throat tightened at the sound. Midoriya, it's okay. No one's going to hurt you. He's just worried about me, you know. Silence. Hitoshi's heart squeezed when he noticed that, despite the threat of those claws against his neck and the boy's reticence to respond, he was shaking slightly. Midoriya, he tried again. If he could just get him to respond, Hitoshi could calm everyone down so that they could figure this out. I know you can't sign while you're holding me, but could you respond in another way so that we know you hear us and understand? For a second, Hitoshi didn't think it was going to work. Then a slight vibration tickled his back and the boy behind him made a little chirping growl. Nothing like the threatening one he'd made when Hitoshi first entered. Cute. Hitoshi didn't have time to analyze that random thought before he followed that thread and yanked, pulling the boy under his control. He hadn't been sure that kind of response would work. Let go, he ordered. The hands holding him went slack, and Hitoshi stepped forward, out of reach. Aizawa blinked, rubbing his eyes. What the hell are you doing in here, kid? Hitoshi ignored him. Go sit on the bed. Don't move your injured hand. Injuries made it easier for someone to accidentally shock themselves out of his control. The luminosity of Midoriya's eyes was dim behind the glaze of Hitoshi's control as he did as he was instructed. He's hurt. How do you think he got out of the cuffs? Hitoshi threw his father a glare. Although I don't know why you all thought it was a good idea to cuff a traumatized, unconscious teenager and leave him by himself in the first place. Aizawa glared back. You really have to ask after being held hostage. As for being alone, Aizawa's expression turned dangerous. I would also like an explanation for that. The police department was supposed to have someone posted outside 24/7. That's why I burst in here when I saw the room unguarded. Same, Hitoshi said. A headache was starting to build. So what do we do with him now? I can't hold this forever. Aizawa's capture scarf floated through the air and wrapped around the teen gently, careful of his arm. Since he's awake, we're going to need him to answer some questions before we decide what to do with him. Can you get a doctor to look at his hand? I'll hold him while you release your quirk. Hitoshi nodded. Ready? At Aizawa's signal, Hitoshi released Midoriya. Feeling like a coward, he stepped out of the room before Midoriya came to himself, not wanting to feel guilty observing the aftermath of the teen realizing he'd been tricked, controlled, and trapped. He felt guilty anyway. Mind control. 49 was familiar with its effects. His breathing picked up as the fog receded, and the strange gray cloth wrapped around his torso only exacerbated the stifling tightness in his chest. A voice spoke, tone soothing, but his vision was blurring. A cough tore from his throat, and he leaned forward, gagging on the mixture of venom and bile that dripped from his lips. What did he do? What did Hito? 49 screamed. A pinch in his arm and then there was only blackness. Hitoshi broke into a run, nearly dragging the doctor behind him as the blood-curdling scream echoed through the hospital. They burst into the room as a nurse withdrew a needle from Midoriya's arm, the boy's eyes wild and tearful. As he slumped, Aizawa caught him, narrowly avoiding the small puddle of puke on the floor between his feet. What happened? He demanded. Aizawa glanced at him as he laid the boy down, following the nurse's instructions to lay him on his side in case he vomited again. Hitoshi could see the reluctance on the man's face. Bad reaction to the control. Hitoshi's stomach dropped. It was his fault. Villain. His mind whispered in the voices of everyone who'd ever labeled him such. Aizawa gave him a firm, somehow reassuring, glare. It's not your fault. You'd escalated the situation as best you could with the resources available to you. If I had to guess, I'd say that he's encountered this kind of mental quirk before. You can't anticipate someone's trauma. This is going to happen again, and you will have to learn how to deal with the aftermath. Hitoshi swallowed, the guilt forming a lump in his throat. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Aizawa turned to the doctor. He tore himself out of the restraints, broke his left hand. The man frowned, stepping around the nurse as she mopped up the vomit. Hitoshi hovered by the wall, watching him prod the delicate bones, tutting at what he found. He'll need a cast, the doctor said, setting the hand back on the bed. She pulled off her stethoscope, huffing as a strand of hair tangled around the instrument. I'm going to check him over while I'm here. His previous injuries were treated with a quirk, correct? Aizawa nodded. It was a child's quirk, so I'm concerned about the possible side effects. She mentioned something about him disappearing. I erased her quirk once he was visibly healed, but she hasn't woken up yet to clarify why she thought he was going to disappear. The doctor clicked her tongue and continued checking Midoriya's vitals. Everything seems in order, she concluded after a few minutes. Besides the injuries he's caused himself, he seems to be healthy. I hesitate to make any definitive claims. But that's my best assessment at the moment given his lack of records. His biology is primarily human, but without a baseline. I can't compare his current vitals to his norm. How long before he wakes? After confirming with the nurse about what was used, the doctor said, a couple hours. Maybe longer since he's so small. Hitoshi looked at the unconscious boy. He was small. Todoroki had mentioned it. But when Midoriya was awake, he had a presence about him that screamed threat. Unconscious though, he barely looked older than 12, the tense lines of his face relaxing, lips barely parted in a soft exhale. Hitoshi's eyes traced over the scar that trailed from his temple to beside his mouth and wondered what caused it. His gut clenched when he noticed how old the scar tissue looked and wondered how old Midoriya had been when he'd received that wound. Aizawa had pulled out his phone. Mike, there was an incident. He nodded to Hisashi's response. Yeah, I need to talk to Naomasa about a few things. The complete lack of security on Midoriya's room for starters. He paused, listening. He broke his arm, but otherwise we're fine. Hitoshi got him under control. This time, Aizawa ignored Hisashi's squawking, talking through it. He's unconscious now. Can you send someone up here so that I can find Naomasa? When he wakes, we need to get his statement so we can figure out this shitshow. He hummed a response to his husband's before hanging up. A couple of Ryukyu's sidekicks are going to come keep watch. He informed Hitoshi. You should go home, get some rest. Hitoshi frowned. But Eri hasn't woken up yet. The whole point of me coming was so she'd have someone she recognized here. Aizawa sighed. We don't know when she'll wake up. Quirk-induced exhaustion can be unpredictable. It would be illogical for you to burn out hovering by her bedside while she's unconscious. Go home, kid. Aizawa squeezed his shoulder, and Hitoshi succumbed to the urge to press his face into the man's arm briefly, eyes burning, before he pulled away. All right, he said, voice rough. Let me know if something changes. Aizawa nodded, fingers tightening for a second before he pushed Hitoshi out of the room. Hitoshi stared dumbly at the closed door before sighing. Exhaustion sitting heavy on his shoulders, he ducked out of the hospital. The train ride seemed to pass in a blink, and he was grateful for the shower he'd gotten at the hospital that allowed him to simply shuck off his pants and climb into bed, sleep greeting him eagerly for once. How did you end up with Overhaul? 49 stared at a spot on the wall to the left of the detective's head. Soon after he'd woken, bleary from the sedative and wrist confined in a cast, he'd been escorted to what looked to be an empty office in the hospital. Now, he sat across from the detective and the man he'd met during the raid who could erase quirks. While he'd never been interrogated before, the HPSC had trained him thoroughly for the eventuality. 49 seconds' jaw might as well have been wired shut. His eyes didn't flicker from the scuff on the wall, and the fingers of his left hand tapped a simple pattern in Morse code. 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49 49. Midoriya. A sharp tone drew his attention away from the pattern although he didn't move. The detective, Naomasa, he'd introduced himself as, pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the desk between them. The window was too small for a quick escape. 2 guards at the door. Pro Hero 3 feet away. Vents. A photograph hovering in front of his face cut off his view of the wall. Hebai. Your handler was caught and questioned. He confessed to selling you to Overhaul. Why did Overhaul want you? 49 stared through the photograph as though he could still see the wall beyond it. The photograph was placed on the table. We are aware of your situation. Naomasa continued, voice softening. Your handler has informed us of your contract with the HPSC. Human trafficking, child endangerment, medical malpractice, the list goes on. You're not in trouble, but we need information to help you. Tap, 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 tap. A chair squeaked as it slid across the floor. Naomasa, give us a minute. The detective frowned as he saw the dark expression on his colleague's face. Eraserhead, I'll call you back in. Just give us the room. With a final glance at 49, the man nodded and left. They were alone. 49. His tapping paused almost imperceptibly before resuming. Asset 49, your last mission was a failure. Was this man HPSC? He knew they had many pro heroes under their thumb. His eyebrows twitched in confusion before smoothing back into a blank mask. Was this an interrogation or a debriefing? Eraserhead was following HPSC's script. Should he respond? The stress and conditioning were getting to him, making his brain fuzzy, telling him to comply. You failed to terminate your target in Osaka. Explain. The tapping stopped. There was a fog over 49 seconds' mind. Mission report. Osaka assignment. I infiltrated the motel. Target was sequestered in his room. Shortly after breaching the premises, I received the signal to retreat. I did so. On arrival at the vehicle, I became aware of the attack on the HPSC. My handler instructed me to do nothing. We drove to Shizuoka and laid low in a motel, 49 sign. At some point he'd stood, back straight and movements crisp. Eraserhead's eyes narrowed. Then what? My handler contacted Chisaki Kai, Akko overhaul. As men came to our room. For the first time, 49 seconds hands faltered. Did they know? We were taken to Chisaki's base of operations. There was a test, and the sale was made. I spent the remaining time overseeing his asset. Until the raid. You hesitated. Eraserhead's voice was merciless. What did you leave out? 49. The brief flash of his secondary eyelids was the only sign of his nerves. Before Chisaki's men arrived, I attempted to leave. I killed 2 of his men when they attempted to stop me, as well as another when Chisaki wanted to test my abilities. What did you do with Eri? That was it. No swift retribution for his attempted escape. No, that wasn't it. They must have already known and had something planned. I oversaw the asset's everyday activities including basic needs, safety, and education. I escorted her to and from Chisaki's labs and ensured she was not damaged or lost. Did you ever harm her? That was an odd question. No, the man sighed, his stern demeanor wavering. Without a word, he went to the door. Niyamasa. The 2 men re-entered, the detective's eyebrows raising at the sight of 49 standing in front of his chair. Does your quirk work on sign language? Eraserhead asked. Niyamasa shook his head. It relies on verbal response. Eraserhead gave 49 a searching look. Then I've asked what I needed to for now. I can fill you in after we return him to his room. The detective looked like he wanted to protest, but restrained himself. All right, he said slowly, gathering his papers off the desk. 49 felt like he was looking through a tunnel. The detective must not have known. Eraserhead must have sent him out of the room to keep from blowing his cover. 49 waited for orders. Come on, kid. Not acknowledging the change in Eraserhead's demeanor, 49 followed them through the halls and back into the hospital room where they left him, reminding him of the guards. 49 sat on the bed in a daze, waiting for the HPSC to return and claim him. I can't take him. Hitoshi hovered outside the door, listening to his dad and the detective talk. Midoriya. Were they asking his dad to take him in? You've already agreed to take Eri. Aizawa sighed. Because they need my quirk to keep hers under control. And more than that, I have Hitoshi to think about. I couldn't ask him to share us with not 1 but 2 extraordinarily traumatized children. The time and attention they would require. You should do it. Hitoshi didn't think before he spoke, stepping into the room. He winced at the taken-aback look on Niyamasa's face and his dad's unimpressed one. Hitoshi, Aizawa said, voice reprimanding. You were not a part of this discussion. I kind of am though. He raised his hands defensively when thunderclouds started gathering on his dad's face. I mean, I know I shouldn't have been listening, but if the reason you don't want to take him in is because of me, then I think it's important that I say that I don't mind. You guys can do a lot for them. You're great with traumatized kids, he said with a self-conscious laugh. Aizawa grimaced. Hitoshi, you're barely settled yourself, and these kids could take years before they are even moderately well adjusted. That is a huge change. I know, but they need you. Hitoshi shook his head as his dad opened his mouth to object. I know, I need you too. I am not saying that I don't, but I'm okay, and I want you guys to do this. Aizawa scrutinized him. After a long minute, he nodded. I'll have to talk to Hisashi, but he'll say yes, Hitoshi finished. It was no secret that Mike wanted a big family. He will. Aizawa turned back to Niyamasa. Will you get the paperwork? Sure, Eraser. I really do appreciate it. Aizawa scrubbed a hand over his face. I need coffee. Midoriya hadn't spoken since they'd let him out of the hospital. Not even sign language or the growls and chirps. Hitoshi snuck another glance at him out of the corner of his eye. The green-haired boy stared out the window of the car, wings crumpled awkwardly against the seat. A pair of Quirk suppressant bracelets glinted on his wrists, one high on his forearm to avoid the cast that encased his left wrist. Almost there, Hisashi said cheerfully, yellow eyes looking at the pair in the mirror. Hitoshi could tell that the man was withholding most of his excitement to avoid scaring the boy after his over-enthusiastic greeting had sent Midoriya scrambling backwards, fangs and wings raised in clear threat. A sharp glance from Aizawa had instantly changed that though, sending the boy into an almost military posture, all emotion wiped from his face. Hisashi had frowned at his husband for that but said nothing, lowering his tone as he explained who he was and what was happening. With the glazed look in Midoriya's eyes though, Hitoshi wasn't sure how much he'd actually processed. Still, they made it to the car without further incident. His shoulders relaxed when he saw the house. After living with Mike and Aizawa for over a year now, their house had become a sanctuary, one of the few places he felt safe. A glance at Midoriya, and the cautious, calculating look on his face as his gaze flitted clearly over the exits and escape routes told Hitoshi that he didn't feel the same. Understandably. All right, listeners, Hisashi said, parking the car. We're home. Midoriya followed his parents into the house, turned slightly as he walked to keep Hitoshi in his peripheral vision. Hitoshi watched his green eyes flit over the cozy living room and bright kitchen where a few dishes still sat stacked in the sink. The boy jumped visibly when one of the cats, Mocha, sprinted at them from under the couch. Hitoshi stared, fascinated, as Midoriya's pupils became slits and the tips of his fangs pressed into his lower lip. "Don't eat the cat." Aizawa's deadpan voice rang through the house, and Midoriya's eyes snapped to him, expression disappearing once more. Hitoshi winced. It took time to understand his dad's sense of humor, so of course Midoriya didn't know that he was trying to be lighthearted. Clearly Hisashi was on a similar train of thought, elbowing his husband before turning a bright smile on Midoriya. "Don't mind Sho," he said, scooping up the cat. "He gets cranky without his afternoon nap." Ignoring his husband's glare, Hisashi motioned for Midoriya to follow him. "How about I give you a tour, and then we'll get you settled in your room?" After a moment of unnerving eye contact, Midoriya nodded and followed the man out of the room. "Pops will end you if you scare Midoriya away. He has nowhere else to go," Aizawa replied, toeing off his shoes. Hitoshi's eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring. He kicked off his shoes as well. "If you didn't want the kid, you shouldn't have taken him in. It fucking sucks when someone offers to be a parent and then treats you like garbage." Ignoring Aizawa's shocked expression, Hitoshi stalked off toward Hisashi and Midoriya's room. 49 examined the space, from the bare beige walls to the plain blue bedspread folded crisply on the twin bed. Plain, austere, functional. He nodded to himself. This was more than he expected. The loud blonde man hovered in the doorway, watching his examination of the space. Unsure what the man was looking for, 49 gave him a small bow in thanks. Teeth flashed as the man broke into a grin, and 49 was tempted to slide his nictating membrane over his eyes to protect against the brightness. 49 wasn't sure what this man's role was. Aizawa was clearly a handler of some sort. The purple boy, Hitoshi, was almost certainly an asset posing as the man's child. Mind control quirks were coveted at the HPSC. 49 was only shocked that he was allowed to live undercover in such an exposed way rather than being kept secure back at a facility. It was possible the blonde, Hisashi, was a trainer, someone who specializes in mental quirks, but the man's quirk was clearly voice-related. Perhaps he trained that aspect of Hitoshi's quirk, given its voice activation. If 49 wasn't terrified of mind control quirks, he would have been utterly fascinated. "Do you want to stay here for a while and settle in? Maybe take a nap, or do you want to come back out with us?" A choice. 49 froze. What was the right one? He lifted his hands hesitantly. "Stay here." The man's smile widened. "Sure thing, little listener. And just so you know," he said, hands beginning to move with his speech, "everyone here speaks sign language too, so there shouldn't be any problems if you need to ask for anything." 49 nodded. Sign language was a requirement at the HPSC as it was useful for silent communication on missions, so it made sense that they would know it. With another reassurance that 49 could request anything from them, how stupid did they think he was? The man left. 49 listened as the footsteps grew fainter. When he heard conversation begin in the other room, he relaxed. He shook out his wings, flinching as the tight muscles pulled. Keeping them tucked and out of the way made them cramp, and it usually took over an hour of stretching and massaging them before bed before they relaxed enough for him to sleep. He sank to the floor. The cast from the hospital itched, and his hands shook slightly from the effort of containing his nerves and panic from being separated from Marie. She was still at the hospital, unconscious. They hadn't let him see her. How was he going to get them out of this? He'd known having her go with the heroes was a risk, but he hadn't expected the HPSC to be among them. Stupid. He should have known better. Now she was in the same position he had once been. They would train her and mold her into a weapon. A killer. She would never be free. The itching around his broken hand spread across his body. How long had it been since he'd last preened? The HPSC had never been fond of that habit, so he had to be careful to only do so when no one was around, keeping an eye on the closed door and an ear tuned to approaching footsteps. 49 stretched his wings out and began combing through them, shivering as his sharp nails scratched the base of crooked feather and loose scales. He teased them into place and dug out those that couldn't be saved, unable to resist the soft purr that started in his chest. He had apparently awoken something in him that wouldn't be easily put to rest. He couldn't deny that the noise was soothing, especially when accompanied by the gentle rocking he'd done since he was a child. The combination was enough to nearly put him to sleep, head drooping as his fingers slowed. 49 shook himself awake. Scraping together the small pile of feathers and scales, he scanned the room for some place to hide them. They were his. His fangs pricked his lips as a territorial feeling stirred. They always took his things, despite his near 0% success rate at keeping his possessions. No matter how well he hid them, 49 could never prevent himself from trying. After some searching, 49 found that the knobs on the wooden bed frame were hollow and smuggled his loot inside. A warm glow filled him. 49 eyed the room. It didn't smell right. Silently, he crept around, rubbing against the meager furniture and doorframe. Nose crinkling as he sniffed the bed, he crawled onto it, cringing at the creak of bed springs. After some rolling around, he managed to make a nest that didn't make him want to hurl. Thankfully, the bed had been pushed into the corner of the room, so he was able to press his back to the wall as he curled up, eye on the door as he finally succumbed to sleep, fingers buried in the wing he tucked over himself. "What is he doing?" Azashi said, perplexed as they watched the small boy creep around his room. Their eyes had been glued to the small monitor for a while now. "He's scenting everything," Hitoshi said, eyes wide. "He loved mutation quirks. I lived with a few kids who did the same thing. One had a cat quirk. I don't know what the other one was, but neither could sleep if the room didn't smell right." Azashi's head tilted. "Do dragons usually do that?" Hitoshi suppressed the urge to bounce on the balls of his feet, excitement buzzing. "Not as teens or adults. Baby dragons do. I've been doing research. Usually the parents will do that for their kids. But if the dragons don't grow up with their parents following those instincts, then they'll develop differently, finding other ways to fill their needs. So, if my research is right, he'll probably do some things that a younger dragon usually would, like the hoarding. I'm guessing that's why he hid his scales and feathers." A frown crept onto his face. "Usually, their hoards are other things, like games or rocks. But if I had to guess, he probably didn't have access to stuff like that, so he ended up hoarding the only thing he could." Hizashi winced at the thought, then brightened. "We should go shopping. Then he can find other stuff to hoard." Bright yellow eyes fixed on Hitoshi with laser focus, and Hitoshi froze. "What?" The grin that bloomed on Hizashi's face was slightly manic. "Teach me everything you know about dragons." "No." Hitoshi watched his pop's face turn indignant. "What do you mean, no?" Hizashi's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Shouta, that boy needs things. He needs clothes at the very least." Aizawa folded his arms, staring down his husband. "Then have him make a list and go yourself. Or order online. But I'm not taking a teenage killing machine to the mall the day he's released from the hospital." "Okay, 1, we wouldn't go today," Hizashi argued. "And 2, that child is not a killing machine and it would be extremely harmful for him to hear you refer to him as such." Aizawa winced. "Fine, but you can't possibly think it's a good idea to take a traumatized, highly trained teenager into an enormous crowd of people. You just hate malls." "I do hate malls." Aizawa cut off Hizashi's triumphant response. "I'm also right." Hizashi's shoulders sagged. "But there's a small group of stores for mutant quirks 10 minutes from here," Hitoshi interjected, not looking up from his phone. "No crowds. Nearby. Has accommodations for his specific needs." "Yes," Hizashi crowed. "Hitoshi, you are my favorite." "Suck it, Shouta." Aizawa raised an eyebrow. "I frequently." "Absolutely not." Hitoshi yelped. "No sex jokes while I'm in the room, dads, we've been over this." Aizawa shrugged, unrepentant. "You took his side." Hitoshi glared. "Because he's right. Anyway," Hizashi interjected, steering them away from an argument now that he'd won. "We'll go check that out tomorrow. In the meantime, Hitoshi, will you get the listener for dinner?" "Sure, Pops." Dinner was awkward. Midoriya clearly didn't know what he was supposed to do, eyeing the dining room table as if it were a foreign entity and only sitting after Aizawa's abrupt order. Hitoshi frowned, something he found himself doing almost any time the two interacted. Aizawa had apologized to him after their argument in the doorway and explained that he did, in fact, intend to be a parent to Midoriya. Still, Hitoshi felt like something was amiss. Aizawa was treating Midoriya extremely differently than he had treated Hitoshi when he'd come to live with them. Granted, Hitoshi and Midoriya came from very different circumstances, but it still rubbed him the wrong way every time he saw Midoriya stand at parade rest when Aizawa entered a room. Likewise, Midoriya immediately stopped any stimming or animalistic behaviors when Aizawa appeared, like he expected to be punished for them, compared to what Hitoshi had observed on the monitor when Midoriya was alone. The boy already hid almost all of those behaviors, even when it was just Hitoshi or Hizashi. Hitoshi pushed his unease aside. There would be an adjustment period, likely a long adjustment period, and it would be unrealistic to expect otherwise. Hitoshi jumped in shock, torn out of his thoughts by the snarl that echoed through the room. Hizashi froze, hand extended toward the salt shaker that stood coincidentally beside Midoriya's bowl. The man withdrew his hand slowly, not looking away from the boy who was hunched over his food, teeth bared. "I'm sorry," his pop said, voice soft. "I wasn't going to take." 49, his dad snapped, and Hitoshi noticed for the first time that his quirk was activated. Glowing red eyes focused on Midoriya. The boy froze, and Hitoshi could see his pupils shrink in fear, all of his attention on the pissed-off man across the table. A small shudder ran through the smaller boy, and he jerked back from the table, looking down and to the side. Hitoshi's stomach clenched as he noticed how the movement exposed Midoriya's neck to what, in his eyes, was his superior. "Dad," he said, trying to slow the train wreck that was occurring before his eyes. "No, Hitoshi," Aizawa snapped. "It's unacceptable for him to threaten Hizashi, or any of us, in our home. Do you understand?" The last part was aimed at Midoriya. Yes, the boy signed, expression tight. Aizawa released his quirk, but his glare remained. Then this won't happen again. Shouta. Yes, Midoriya repeated. Hitoshi didn't move as Aizawa shot Hisashi a warning glare. They finished the meal in silence. Midoriya didn't touch his food again. What the hell was that? Hisashi finally erupted as the door to Midoriya's room clicked shut. Aizawa exhaled harshly through his nose. We need to have boundaries. Midoriya is too dangerous for us to let him do whatever he wants. He has food insecurities. Shouta. Hisashi's voice was a harsh whisper. He wasn't threatening me. He was just communicating the way he knows how. Hitoshi sat in the corner, feeling numb. The events that had played out shook free old memories that he thought he'd put to bed. There was a tightness in his chest he hadn't felt in a while. And although he'd known that having Midoriya and Tsunari here would likely create triggering situations, he hadn't expected Aizawa's behavior to be one of them. We can't indulge him, Aizawa argued. He can speak through sign language if he has a problem. Hisashi cut him off with a jerk of his hand. You really think he has ever had the option to communicate his needs? Shouta. Midoriya uses sign language entirely to respond to orders. In his world, speaking is used to indicate obedience and nothing else. As for indulging him, Hisashi's voice turned scathing. Food insecurity can be absolutely crippling. And as you are the only person in this house who has not experienced it, you will sit down, shut up, and listen to us when we tell you that what just happened was, in your words, unacceptable. Hisashi looked at his husband in anger and disappointment. If I didn't have to think about Midoriya stumbling across you in the morning, Shouta, you'd be sleeping on the couch. Hisashi's attention turned to Hitoshi, ignoring his wide-eyed husband, who looked like he'd just been gut-punched. Are you okay, baby? This has been a lot. Hitoshi swallowed, feeling lost and kind of floaty. Why'd you call him 49? His voice was quiet. Aizawa's dark eyes flicked between his angry husband and his upset son. It's the name he knows. I thought it would elicit a reaction. Hitoshi's jaw clenched. Midoriya, he stressed the name, believes that names are for people and numbers are for assets. If you use it again, I will know which one you consider him. Aizawa, if possible, looked even more gutted. Understood. Hitoshi nodded, face blank. I'm going to bed. Okay, baby, Hisashi said softly, just barely brushing a hand over his hair. Come get me if you need anything. Hitoshi nodded again and walked away. Stupid. He knew better than to react like that. Food was a privilege and one he only received because he was useless when he was weak with hunger. It had been entirely unintentional. One of those urges he didn't even realize were there until they overtook him. He directed it at the nice one too. The man was likely already planning retaliation. Punishments were always worse when they arrived after the fact. Stupid, weak, he'd submitted immediately. And the fact burned. If he'd played at submission to stay safe, that would have been one thing. That would have been smart. But humans didn't bare their necks to their superiors. Animal, freak, monster. How was he supposed to savor if he folded under a simple glare? 49 moved his nest under the bed rather than on top of it, grateful the mattress stood at least a foot over the floor. Though they'd laughed, his handlers had never indicated that he would be punished for doing so. Still, he would try not to caught under there. Just in case, curling in a ball of blankets and dust, 49 managed to drift into a fitful sleep, glowing green eyes slitted and still fixed on the door. The house was quiet when he awoke. The room was still dark, indicating that dawn hadn't yet broken. Despite the lack of a reason to rise early while he was with Chisaki, 49 Seconds' body still woke him promptly at 5 a.m. He peered at what little of the room he could see from beneath the bed. Should he get up? Was he allowed to leave the room? His stomach growled, reminding him that he'd eaten barely half a bowl the night before. Despite the fear that his handlers would be angry at the wasted food, he hadn't been able to touch the bowl again for fear that the nausea would cause him to vomit, which would undoubtedly make them angrier. Hisashi had put it in the fridge and told him that he could finish it later if he wanted. His mouth watered. The house was silent. After a moment of tense indecision, 49 squirmed out from under the bed, suppressing a sneeze. He paused for a few seconds after each step, listening for signs of life. He flinched when the door creaked, and he didn't even open it halfway before slipping out. 49 padded through the house, wishing he had his quirk so he could just disappear. The thought that he could just leave ran through his mind, but he brushed it off. He had to wait until Iri was awake, and preferably hear. Heart in his throat, 49 eventually managed to sneak the covered bowl out of the fridge. He curled up in the corner between an armchair and the wall where he could observe the room while fairly out of sight. The dish wasn't meant to be eaten cold, but that didn't stop him from savoring it. Too soon, the bowl was empty. 49 licked his hands, dabbing up stray pieces of rice and drops of sauce. The sun had begun to creep through the curtains. He needed to wash the dish and slip back into his room before anyone awoke. Cringing at every noise, he managed to clean up and find the right cabinet. It was during his retreat that disaster struck. Green and purple eyes clashed, the other asset staring at him wide-eyed as he stepped into the hallway. Gravity-defying hair stood in all directions. and 49 noticed an abundance of cartoon cats on the other boy's pajamas. They stared at each other before the boy gestured him toward the kitchen, glancing at their handler's bedroom door. 49 followed. The boy stifled a yawn with his sleeve, half asleep as he started fiddling with the coffee maker. 49 observed. They must be allowed out then, otherwise the other asset wouldn't be so casual. Want food? The boy, Hitoshi, asked, moving toward the fridge. 49 shook his head, eyes narrowing in suspicion. Was the boy trying to get him in trouble? Hitoshi shrugged, grabbing a carton of milk and a box of cereal. 49 frowned. That wasn't an approved breakfast item, too much sugar and not enough nutrients. Hitoshi ate in silence, only letting out a happy murmur when the coffee finished brewing. He buried his face in the steaming mug with a sigh. 49 had never had coffee. Sensing his curious gaze, Hitoshi looked up. He glanced between 49 and the mug. Want some? 49 tilted his head, sniffing the air. It had a strange bitter smell, but the other boy had reacted like it was ambrosia. Hitoshi's face held no deception. Slowly, he raised his hands. Try. Hitoshi shrugged. Knock yourself out, he said, sliding the mug across the counter. 49 sniffed it again. The dark liquid didn't look terrible. After a brief moment of indecision, he took a gulp. His eyes widened in horror, and he thrust the mug back at the other boy, face pulled in a grimace as he wiped his tongue with his sleeve. With an expression torn between amusement and offense, Hitoshi settled on the former, snorting into his mug as he watched the smaller boy try and recover from his first taste of the bitter liquid. 49 was too distracted by the horrible liquid to notice Hisashi walk into the room. What's so funny? He froze, staring between the other asset and their handler. The purple boy snicked into his coffee, completely relaxed. Turns out, Midoriya isn't a fan of coffee. Oh, Hisashi laughed, turning to him. It's a bit of an acquired taste. These two drink it like life is poison, and coffee is the antidote. I'm more of a tea guy myself. Want to try some? Eyes still wide from his last experience. 49 shook his head quickly, resulting in more laughter from Hitoshi. Hisashi pointed two finger guns at him. No worries, listener. Offer stands if you ever change your mind. The kitchen fell into a comfortable silence again as Hisashi bustled about making his tea and Hitoshi practically drowned himself in his coffee. How are things with Dad? Hitoshi broke the silence, gaze firmly on the mug between his hands. 49 watched as Hisashi stiffened, then softened. We talked. There are some things we have to work out, but you don't need to worry. Hitoshi made an indecisive noise. Yesterday. He glanced at 49. He kind of freaked me out. 49 frowned, confused as to what was going on. While he understood that Hitoshi and their handlers used a familial guise as their cover, they seemed to continue those roles even when no one was around. Maybe they were being observed. 49 glanced around for cameras. He didn't see any, but they could be well hidden. Hisashi ran a hand down Hitoshi's back. I know. Your dad, he sighed. He's not the best with emotions, you know that. And he can ideas stuck in his head, especially when he think he's protecting people. The man looked at 49. Midoriya, you should hear this too. Yesterday, you did nothing wrong. At the table, he added at 49 seconds confused look. I'm not mad at you, and Shouta shouldn't have been either. We just want everyone to be safe. Shouta shouldn't have snapped at you when you tried to keep me away from your food. 49 didn't know how to react. If there were cameras, was he supposed to act for them? How would a person act in this situation? It's okay, he signed hesitantly. Hisashi shook his head. It's not okay, he stressed. You should feel safe here too. And you should know that you can have as much food as you want, whenever you want. Yellow eyes stared into his. Okay. 49 nodded, keeping up the act. He knew better though. Okay. Hisashi blew out a breath. So, he clapped, mood brightening. We thought we'd go shopping today. 49 seconds head tilted. Hisashi picked up on his silent question. You need clothes, he said, ticking off items on his fingers. Stuff for your bedroom, entertainment, books, do you like to read? He interrupted himself. 49 nodded genuinely. And Hisashi pumped a fist. Yes, now I have an excuse to go to the bookstore. Like you ever need one, Hitoshi said. Hisashi pouted. You have no room to talk. If your dad didn't enjoy napping in the armchairs so much, he'd be dragging us out of there most days. 49 wasn't sure what they were talking about. He had clothes. He'd received 2 pair of joggers and athletic tops when in the hospital as well as a pair of shoes. Maybe they were going to give him a new suit for missions. They were usually just delivered. But things were so different here that he would have to get used to unexpected changes. Hisashi clapped again. Why don't you boys get showered and dressed? And I'll get show up and moving. Hitoshi, would you mind showing Midoriya where all the bathroom supplies are? Sure, Pops. Hitoshi waved for 49 to follow him. Hitoshi was careful not to seem like he was gawking at the awesome mutation quirks he was seeing. They had already gotten suspicious glances as 3 obviously non-mutation individuals entered the stores, the stares relaxing when Midoriya stepped in his winged, Fang glory. Still, Hitoshi knew that his interest in the individuals around them would not be taken well, so he made sure to stay focused on Midoriya and his dads. Midoriya seemed confused. He'd agreed to shopping with surprisingly little hesitation, so Hitoshi wasn't sure why he looked like he expected to get yelled at for touching anything. Pop seemed a little lost too. See anything you like, listener? He prompted, smiling at the boy who just blinked at him. Aizawa sighed. He needs at least 3 pairs of pants, 5 shirts, underwear, a belt, socks, and a pair of shorts. Probably another pair of shoes too. Hitoshi noticed that Aizawa held Midoriya's full attention. The man seemed to notice as well. They stared at each other silently, almost as if some kind of conversation was happening. Then Midoriya turned away and began gathering the indicated items. 5 black shirts with slits for his wings, 2 pairs of jeans and a pair of joggers, plain black socks and underwear, and a pair of cargo shorts. He placed them in the cart of a crestfallen Hisashi. Are you sure that's what you want, listener? They have cute graphic tees too. See, this one has a dancing cat with a galaxy on it. Midoriya stared at the shirt and at Hisashi's encouraging face. Then slowly, he took the shirt and placed it in the cart. Aizawa snorted, and Hitoshi's lips twitched at his pop's expression. The man sighed in defeat before hitching a smile back onto his face. All right then, how about we look at bedspreads and pillows? Seemingly taking Midoriya's blank stare for agreement, he marched off, the dragon boy trailing behind him like a lost duckling. Aizawa and Hitoshi stared at the pair, before Hitoshi noticed the coffee vending machine sitting in the corner of the shop. Nudging his dad, he pointed. In silent agreement, they converged on it. After a moment of bliss, Hitoshi turned to his dad. If you distract Pops, I try and get Midoriya to loosen up. Maybe pick out some stuff he actually likes. Aizawa sipped his coffee. He's probably never been asked what he likes, let alone been allowed to buy anything. If it doesn't click today, we can always come back. Feeling Hitoshi's surprised gaze, Aizawa looked down at his son. Kid, I'm an asshole, but I'm not an asshole. I had safety concerns about the mall. Now that we've found a suitable alternative, I think it's a good thing to get him some stuff of his own. Hitoshi relaxed, feeling some of the leftover tension leaving him. Aizawa might be emotionally stunted, but he did care. And he did try. Let's go find them. You can't be serious. Hitoshi stared at the other boy, aghast, as the kid held up a shirt that said pants with the first real smile he'd ever seen on his face. Hitoshi facepalmed. Midoriya's fashion sense was an affront to Japanese society as a whole. All right, he sighed, putting it in the basket. 2 more. One that said socks and the other formal wear quickly followed. When sweater vest came near the basket, he put his foot down. Absolutely not. Pick a new genre. The boy pouted but put the shirt back. The pair wandered into the hero section, and Midoriya looked apathetic until he saw Hawk's merch. While his expression didn't change, the boy wiggled slightly in place, feathers puffing up. Hitoshi eyed the merch. Hawks was an HPSC-sponsored hero and part of a program that would have resembled the one Midoriya was in. This was common knowledge since Nenzu and Hawks released an expose right after the raid on the HPSC facility. Did they know each other? You like it? He said hesitantly. Midoriya nodded, fingers brushing the wings painted on the front of one of the shirts, brushing off his concerns about possibly triggering associations. Hitoshi nodded toward the merch encouragingly. Go ahead and pick a couple out then. We'll probably have enough then and can go see what Dad and Pops are up to. Midoriya skimmed through the designs and ended up picking the ones where his wings were most heavily featured. Hitoshi didn't fail to notice that Hawks and Gang Orca merch took up a disproportionate amount of real estate, which made sense in a mutant-specific store. He wondered just how much Quirk discrimination Midoriya had encountered. Cool, Hitoshi said, hefting the full basket. Let's go find the rents. 49 stared at the piles of bedding and clothes that had been deposited in his room. He hadn't known what to do when they'd first entered the store, but he'd quickly realized that they really did want him to buy stuff. Why? He had no idea, but orders were orders. And the bedding was really soft too. 49 especially loved the comforter. It was a rich, vivid green with shimmery gold accents. It came with multiple matching pillows that weren't scratchy at all despite the embroidery. The sheets were black and silky, and he'd gotten several throw blankets as well that were incredibly fluffy and soft. The store clerk had taken one look at him and recommended something that looked like a large square of foam. The man explained that it would go on the floor so that he could build a nest. 49 seconds' mouth dropped open in awe, and the man's slitted eyes softened. After that, the clerk had taken the time to explain different nesting materials and how to use them. Although he tried not to get too attached, 49 could barely restrain himself when Hisashi tried to carry the nesting materials into the house. He managed to snatch the bags up without being too suspicious, but the man's careful backstep made him think that he wasn't entirely successful. Still, Aizawa didn't say anything, so it was okay. Now 49 arranged the fabrics over the square of foam, which was soft but also firm, and he rubbed himself all over them as he added more to the pile, breathing in the warm, safe scent. For once, he didn't have to worry about his talons tearing into the fabrics, as the clerk had explained that they were intended not to rip, and in fact one of them was specifically intended for him to scrape at in need. 49 barely noticed the happy chirps and purrs that were coming from his chest as he arranged his nest, even retrieving a few of his feathers and scales from their hiding place to stash within the blankets. At last, everything was arranged, and 49 settled happily in the middle of the pile. The feeling was good and overwhelming, and there was also a burning in his chest. 49 sniffed as tears leaked down his cheeks. He didn't analyze the feeling, just letting it happen as he hummed himself to sleep. Hitoshi knew he should stop watching the monitor, but he couldn't. Midoriya's whole demeanor changed when he thought he wasn't being observed, and it was as adorable as it was heartbreaking. The boy had cried himself to sleep in his nest, and although his tears made Hitoshi's eyes well up in sympathy, Hitoshi knew that he wasn't unhappy. Hitoshi had done the same thing when Aizawa and Yamada had put his room together. And although Hitoshi hadn't been dealing with all the repressed natural instincts that Midoriya was experiencing, he had been overwhelmed by the feelings of safety and belonging. Hisashi peered over his shoulder. "He's sleeping." Hitoshi leaned back into his pop's chest. "Yeah," he said, voice hoarse. "Oh, baby." Hisashi wrapped his arms around Hitoshi. "You doing okay?" He hummed. "It's just a little hard. I remember doing this. Not this exactly," he amended, "but close." "Me too." Hitoshi relaxed as he remembered that Hisashi had been a foster kid too. He understood. Before he forgot. "We can never touch that nest," he warned. "Not without invitation. Not unless we want our faces ripped off." Hisashi made a questioning noise. "I managed to find a few articles specifically about mutation quirks in traumatized and abandoned children," he explained. Kids with quirks related to territorial animals, like dragons, often have a heightened expression of those territorial and possessive traits if those needs aren't met when they're young. It might calm down with time and therapy, but right now, he trailed off. He's experiencing these things for the first time. Hisashi finished. "I'll let your dad know. Speaking of, how are you two doing? I know it's been a bit hard for you." Hitoshi closed his eyes as his pop's arms tightened around him. "We talked some at the store. I think we'll be all right." He hesitated. "I think, would it be okay if I had a session with Tanaka-san sometime soon? I know I'm scheduled in a few weeks, but..." "Of course, baby," Hisashi reassured. "I'm proud of you for asking for what you need." Hitoshi twisted in his chair and hugged the man, burying his face in his chest. Hisashi pulled him closer, humming softly as he rubbed circles over his son's back. "You guys want to bring him to school?" He stared at his dad's in disbelief. Hisashi winced. "There's not much of an alternative. He needs to be monitored 24/7 indefinitely, so one of us taking a little time off just isn't enough." "Where will he go?" Hitoshi asked. "He'll mostly be with us," Aizawa said, marking an essay that was already covered in red. Hitoshi blew out a relieved breath when he saw Denki's signature scrawl, then winced in sympathy. His dad's words registered. "Your hell class, Midoriya is, to put it bluntly, a government assassin, and you want to expose him to that chaos. It's full of future heroes." Aizawa sighed like the thought pained him. This will be good experience for them, dealing both with deadly individuals and traumatized victims. They will need to be on their guard and aware of their words and actions. It will be an invaluable lesson. Hitoshi turned wide eyes on Hisashi, who just grimaced and shrugged. "And Nedzu okayed this?" he asked in a last-ditch effort. Aizawa finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Is there a reason you're so vehemently opposed to the idea?" Taken aback, Hitoshi waved his hands defensively. "No, it's just," he hesitated. "My classmates aren't exactly scoring any points for emotional intelligence, and Midoriya is both an easy target and extremely dangerous." Picturing him and Bakugo in a room together, he shivered. Hisashi looked a little green as well. "I would appreciate it if you helped me keep an eye on the situation," Aizawa said. "I do understand your concern, but it really is the best option." Hitoshi slumped. "Kami, help us." "Wait in the teacher's lounge," Aizawa told them. "Hitoshi, bring him in a few minutes after class starts. I want everyone to already be there when I explain the situation." "Okay, Dad." Hitoshi pulled Midoriya down the hall. The other boy had seemed shocked the first few times Hitoshi made physical contact with him, enough so that he'd almost stopped making any attempts, but then the shorter boy began initiating in subtle ways. The thought made Hitoshi warm. He didn't trust them yet, but they were getting there. He pushed through the doors to the teacher's lounge. All Might and Midnight sat inside, chatting idly. They paused as the boys entered. Young Shinsou, All Might, blinked at him, looking weary in his small form. "What are you and your friend doing in here?" "Dad wants us to wait here until class starts," he said. Midnight's eyes hadn't left Midoriya. "Is this?" Hitoshi pushed the other boy toward the couch, being gentle. "Yes." She offered Midoriya a soft smile. "Hello, I'm Midnight. Quirk, somnambulism. Pro hero, UA teacher. Specialty, non-violent takedowns. Subspecialty, sexual abuse and assault victims. Weaknesses. Easily countered with preparation, distance weapons, and long-range quirks. Hitoshi coughed, elbowing the other boy, who froze as though he hadn't even realized what he'd been doing. His signing had been rapid and almost slurred, as if it were the sign equivalent of mumbling. The two teachers stared at them before Midnight recovered. That's right. Wow, you really know your stuff. Are you a fan? Hitoshi stared between the two. What was that? Midoriya had never ever spoken so much in a single sitting. Usually it was like extracting a tooth to get him to sign anything. Midoriya hesitated, curling in on himself like he'd done something wrong. Hitoshi winced. That was probably his fault. I'm sorry. I analyze heroes. Hobby. No need to apologize, Midnight said with a genuine smile. That's a great skill to have. I wouldn't be surprised if Aizawa used you to help teach his students. Quite a few of them need to learn there's more to being a hero than punching stuff. Hey, Hitoshi protested, even though he knew she wasn't talking about him. Class solidarity. Midnight gave him a droll look. Shouldn't you two be headed that way anyway? Class started a minute ago. Hitoshi glanced at the timer, swore, running for the door with Midoriya on his heels and All Might's disapproving language in his ears. Aizawa lifted a brow as they burst into the room, sweaty and disheveled. Well, Hitoshi was. Midoriya wasn't even breathing hard. How nice of you to join us. Ignoring the clamor of questions, Aizawa nodded toward his seat, and Hitoshi slunk away. Midoriya stood by the desk, glancing between them and looking overwhelmed by the noise. Quiet, brats, Aizawa said, quirk flaring. The noise died down. This is Midoriya Izuku, he said, glaring at them. Some of you should already be aware of his situation. As for the rest of you, there are things you need to know, and none of you may ask these things of him directly. Midoriya is currently my ward. He had to pause and level them all with a quirk-infused glare again to silence the room. He was rescued during the Shai Hasekai raid. Midoriya is nonverbal, although those of you who know sign language may be able to communicate with him. You have all been taught the procedures for dealing with victims of long-term abuse. You have also learned how to handle scenarios where you interact with highly trained, highly dangerous individuals such as vigilantes and government agents. You will be utilizing both lessons while Midoriya is present. He paused to let that sink in. You have 3 questions. Choose them wisely. He paused to let that sink in. You have 3 questions. Choose them wisely. Shouting erupted. Aizawa pointed. Basui, go. What is Midoriya capable of that you would specifically mention his training? Aizawa frowned. Midoriya is capable of taking down anyone in this room with the possible exception of me, although we have not tested it. In addition, if you place him in a situation where he feels threatened, he will likely overreact. Mentally review our lessons on trauma and PTSD. Kirishima, are you okay? The boy said, looking at Midoriya. I wasn't near you during the raid, but I heard what happened and what Eri did. Midoriya glanced at Aizawa, who nodded. I'm fine, is all he signed. Good. Bakugo, you're going to give him the floor. Hitoshi wondered, is having him here going to affect our training? Hitoshi sighed. Of course that's what he was worried about. It shouldn't, Aizawa said. Midoriya will be a silent observer, primarily so I can observe him. Bakugo nodded, satisfied. With that settled, Aizawa pulled out a chair and handed it to Midoriya. Take a seat next to Hitoshi. We'll get you a desk at some point. Midoriya nodded, and Hitoshi scooted his chair over to make room. The excitement in the room disappeared as Aizawa pulled out a stack of graded essays, a groan echoing as they all spotted the heavy red scrawl across the papers. Hey, Midoriya, right? 49 stared at the blonde who'd approached him. They were standing in a training area for the heroics class, each of the students dressed in flashy costumes that were going to get them killed if they weren't adjusted. 49 vaguely remembered an old cartoon one of his handlers had shown him before disappearing abruptly. The small, androgynous character had shouted, "No capes," and 49 firmly agreed. Thankfully, it appeared only one of his handler's students had fallen prey to this blunder. The blonde shifted awkwardly under 49's second stare. Well, he said, rubbing the back of his neck with a sheepish grin, I'm Kaminari, but feel free to call me Denki, dig, he said, shooting 49 finger guns in a way reminiscent of Hisashi. 49 seconds' attention was drawn away by the sound of explosions. Another blonde, Bakugo. 49 studied him. Although his costume was flashy, it remained primarily practical other than the clunky grenade-shaped gauntlets on his arms. Maybe they served a purpose. His hands twitched unconsciously as he analyzed the student, forming half-abandoned thoughts. His explosions were likely caused by a liquid he secreted, maybe his sweat. So maybe the gauntlets. His train of thought was broken by a significantly larger explosion when the boy pulled the pin on one of the objects in question. 49 seconds' gaze glittered with predatory intent. That was so cool. The boy's opponent, the spiky redhead, had been thrown out of the sparring circle, his hardening ability unable to prevent him from being propelled into the air. The boy seemed dissatisfied with the match, swearing and stomping toward his opponent, while the words he was screaming seemed insulting. 49 noticed that he was actually giving his opponent good advice. Explosion Boy's gaze swept the room, looking for a new target. His eyes fell on 49. "You," he screamed, pointing at the boy. "Get your ass over here. Teach thinks you can beat me, and I'm going to show him that he's full of shit." 49 bounded over to the ring, excitement stirring at the idea of observing the Quirk up close. The blonde looked at the vicious excitement on his face and grinned. "That's what I'm talking about," he said approvingly. "On 3, 1, 2, Bakugo." Aizawa's voice rang through the room. "What do you think you're doing?" The man stalked toward them. "Midoriya is not here to act as your training dummy. You're the one who said he could beat me." The boy raged. "If none of these extras are going to give me a good fight, then maybe he will." "Absolutely not. Do you want to?" 49 looked at Hitoshi. The purple-haired boy was watching him closely. 49 looked to Aizawa. His handler clearly didn't want him to. After a moment of indecision, he nodded. "See," Bakugo said. "He wants to fight me." "Quiet, Bakugo." Aizawa pinned him with a gaze. "I won't take the suppressants off," he warned. "You'll be fighting quirkless against one of my strongest students. Not to mention the broken hand." 49 shrugged. He'd fought with greater stakes under worse conditions. Aizawa sighed. "Non-lethal moves only. No maiming or deliberate serious injury. Fight until someone taps out, is unconscious, or is out of bounds." Questions. "Are broken bones a serious injury?" "Yes." Aizawa looked like he regretted agreeing to this. "No broken bones." 49 nodded and took a ready position. At this point, the rest of the class had gathered to watch. On 3, 1, 2. The second Aizawa said 3, 49 moved. He came at the blonde with hard and fast blows, having noticed that he was unused to being on the defensive. Taken aback, Bakugo surrendered a step before catching his rhythm, buying himself some time with a small explosion aimed at 49 seconds' head. He was an excellent fighter. 49 found himself grinning as he fell into the dance, muscles loose and swift, eyes bright with the painful bite of explosions coming a little too close for comfort. He challenged himself to move as little as possible, instead subtly redirecting Bakugo's attacks to throw him off balance before landing a hit of his own, always careful to pull back the power of his blows. When Bakugo caught on, all hell broke loose. "You holding back, you shitty nerd," he screamed, exploding the spot where 49 had been moments before. 49 ducked an overhand blow and shrugged. With a guttural noise of rage, Bakugo threw himself at 49 in a flurry of blows and explosions. The noise and speed disorienting enough that 49 had to stop his game. An explosion directly beside his left ear set it ringing as a simultaneous knee struck his gut. He coughed, doubling over. Maybe it was time to end this. 49 grabbed Bakugo's knee before he could retract it, yanking the boy off balance. With a sharp jab, the heel of his hand met Bakugo's nose, snapping his head back. The blonde stumbled backward. 49 lunged forward with a powerful snap of his wings, twisting in the air to deliver an aerial roundhouse to the side of his opponent's head. Despite the boy's last-second attempt to dodge, the blow connected. Bakugo crumpled to the ground. 49 snapped his wings shut, dropping silently to the ground. His eyes fixed on Aizawa, paying no attention to his unconscious opponent. He ran through his mental checklist. He hadn't bitten his opponent or used his talons. No growling or snarling. His eyes remained as human as they ever were. His handlers typically allowed the use of his wings. 49 breathed a sigh of relief. There should be no reason for his handler to punish him. The redhead ran forward, checking on the fallen boy before whistling. "He's out cold," he said, tone impressed. "I'll run him to Recovery Girl." "You played with him." 49 froze. The man's tone was not pleased. Was that not allowed? He nodded slowly. The man scrutinized him. "Follow Kirishima to Recovery Girl. Your left ear is bleeding. Come straight back when she's done with you." 49 gave a small bow of acknowledgement and hurried after the two, ignoring the whispers behind him and the inquisitive stare of a boy with split-color hair who he swore he'd seen before. "Hey bro." The redhead slowed as he noticed 49 following. "That was so manly back there. Not many of us can give Bakugo a run for his money like that." 49 eyed the teen who was casually carrying his unconscious friend. This one had been at the raid. He'd known about Eri. The nurse's office door was open. "What have you done to yourselves now?" The diminutive woman grouched, snatching up her cane. She poked Bakugo's slack cheek and the blooming bruise on his temple. Kirishima grinned at her. "Just some sparring. Midoriya here is a beast." The old woman directed Kirishima to lay Bakugo on the bed and whirled on 49 who flinched back instinctively. "That cane looked like a weapon." "HMMPH. The woman ushered him closer. "Well, bend down. I can't reach you up there, even if you are alarmingly short for your age." The redhead coughed a laugh, and 49 seconds' eye twitched in irritation as he dropped into a squat. He wasn't that short. Slurred complaints announced that Bakugo had awoken. The old woman ran a critical eye over 49, gesturing for Bakugo to wait his turn. She poked at his old scars. Electrocution. His jaw clenched. She must have spotted some of the old Lichtenberg burns on his neck. He thought they'd faded enough to escape notice. He gave a short nod. She continued poking and asking questions for a while, tutting. Kirishima looked ill. Bakugo had heaved himself upright, narrowed crimson eyes focused on the impassive boy. Well, the woman eventually said with a sigh, there's not much I can do for most of this, it's too old. But hop onto the bed and I'll fix the burst eardrum and the new burns. Courtesy of Bakugo, I assume. Kirishima nodded, shushing Bakugo as he began to gripe. 49 perched on the bed, tense. Lay back, dearie, the woman said, the rough push contradictory to her sugared tone. My quirk uses your stamina. You're already exhausted, and the last thing I need is for you to hit the floor. He complied, familiar with the often unpleasant drawbacks to healing quirks. She kissed him, gross, and immediately he had to blink back, dark spots dancing in his vision. He was only half aware as she patted his arm and moved to heal Bakugo. After an indeterminate amount of time, he opened his eyes, not even realizing he'd shut them. Bakugo and Kirishima were quietly talking and Recovery Girl was nowhere to be found. She left, Kirishima said, noticing him awake. The boy grinned, shark teeth flashing. She wanted me to hang with you two until you were good to go back to class. Subtext. They didn't trust him alone in the school, so Kirishima was there to watch him. 49 ignored the trapped feeling in his chest. Ari, he signed. Awake. Sorry man, Kirishima apologized. I don't speak sign language. Bakugo huffed. He asked if Ari was awake yet. Dumbass. Bakubro, I didn't know you knew sign language. So manly, Kirishima whimpered, actual tears in his eyes. Of course I know sign language, shitty hair. Bakugo exploded. My quirk is probably going to deafen me before I'm 30. You think this many explosions up close doesn't have any damn side effects? Kirishima's mouth dropped open. Bakugo ignored him. They don't tell us shit. The only people who would know are the teachers. 49 nodded, fists clenched. He pushed himself up to leave when Bakugo spoke again. So what kind of fucked up shit have you been doing? Bakugo, Kirishima hissed. Aizawa-sensei said. Who gives a fuck? Red eyes bored into 49-second stoic green ones. If he's gonna hang around us, we should know what we're dealing with. And you heard all the shit Recovery Girl pointed out. No one gets that many scars from sitting around playing babysitter, even if it is for the Yakuza. So, he did know about Overhaul, to an extent. Kirishima must have told him, but not about the commission. Bakugo swung his legs up to sit cross-legged, facing him head-on. Have you ever killed anyone? Aizawa had already implied that he was highly dangerous in his introduction. Yes. What did you do before the Yakuza? No. Red eyes glowered. What do you mean, no? A calculating look appeared on his face. You can't say. He frowned. So Aizawa wasn't kidding about the vigilante or government agent thing. But the HPSC wouldn't have let you go to the Yakuza. So you must be a vigilante. He finished triumphantly. Neither of them missed Kirishima's soft noise of disagreement. The redhead froze, looking mortified as their eyes lasered in on him. Shitty hair. Kirishima waved his arms. I really can't say anything. Bakugo's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. So it is a government thing. His eyes blew wide in understanding, flicking back to 49. That Gotham raid. Months ago. All those freaking kids trained to be child soldiers and shit, like hawks but worse. You're one to talk, 49 snarked. The school churns out more child soldiers than the HPSC ever did. We're not child soldiers, we're heroes. 49 stared at him, deadpan. To ch. Bakugo clicked his tongue. Wouldn't expect you to understand the difference. Unsocialized lab rat, science experiment of death. 49 felt his lips twitch in an unfamiliar expression before he snorted, wheezing with harsh, nearly silent laughter. Bakugo looked gratified. Kirishima looked horrified. You can't just say that, Kirishima hissed, appalled. Shut the fuck up, shitty hair, he said, leaning back on his pillows with a faint smirk. The winged rat doesn't seem to mind. Hitoshi watched as his dad grew more and more agitated, staring at the door as if that would bring Bakugo, Kirishima, and, most importantly, Midoriya through it faster. Most of his classmates likely couldn't see the tension building in the man's shoulders, but Hitoshi had learned his subtle mannerisms. Hitoshi groaned quietly. He had a hard enough time focusing on ethics and heroism without his father's distraction and his own concerns in the mix. Aizawa's shoulders slumped. Hitoshi followed his gaze to the door the three missing students were walking through. He squinted. Were Bakugo and Midoriya engaging in an actual conversation? Yes, they were. His shock was tainted by a hint of jealousy as he watched the two converse silently. Hands flying. He buried the feeling as soon as it appeared. It was good for Midoriya to make friends, although Bakugo was an unique choice. Hitoshi hadn't even known his classmate knew sign language. The two stopped their conversation abruptly as they noticed the class's attention, Bakugo shooting Midoriya an indecipherable look. Aizawa nodded toward Hitoshi when Midoriya looked to him for direction. Hitoshi pushed the boy's seat out from under the desk. As Midoriya took his seat, the class settled, and Aizawa's lecture resumed. "So, how was everyone's day?" Hisashi asked, stirring his soup as he eyed the three sullen faces around the table. After a moment of awkward silence, Hitoshi took pity on him. "Normal. Ectoplasm Sensei's clones caught Kaminari trying to cheat on a math test and flunked him. Ashido melted her desk, presumably as a distraction, but Kaminari only made it halfway across the room before being caught. They both got detention. Dad threatened to expel everyone when we interrupted his nap." Hitoshi shoveled food into his mouth remorselessly as his dad received a lecture about his history of expulsion. Letting the dark-haired man off the hook, Hisashi turned to Midoriya. "What did you do today? I heard you ended up with Recovery Girl for a while." They'd learned how to phrase questions to avoid one-word answers. Midoriya looked up from the food he wasn't eating, eyes flitting from face to face and apparently deciding he couldn't get out of it. He said, "I sparred. Soft explosion lost. I did not lose control. Human only." The boy went back to poking at his food as if that were that, unaware of the concerned glances over his head. "Midoriya, hun?" "Oh," Hisashi had his gentle parent voice on. "What do you mean, human only?" Midoriya frowned, head tilted. "Fighting. Not allowed to be monster. Control instincts. No fangs, no venom or biting. Always upright. No growling, pupils round. Human only." In retrospect, they should have expected the HPSC to be discriminatory assholes. Hisashi made a choking sound, already waving his hands as though he could blow away the horrifying bullshit that Midoriya had just spouted. "No," he stressed. "That's not right. That's..." He had to stop to gather his thoughts. In the meantime, Midoriya had frozen. His face remained blank, but Hitoshi could read in his tense body language and the way he angled himself toward Aizawa, hiding his back, that he thought he'd done something wrong. "You're not in trouble," Hitoshi signed, trying to keep the movement subtle and hidden. He didn't think he succeeded, but his parents didn't comment. "Baby," Hisashi finally recovered, "you are human. No matter how you act or what your quirk is." Midoriya's eyes flicked to him, taking this as a sign of encouragement. The man continued, "No one expects you to hide those parts of yourself, especially something as involuntary as pupil dilation." His face screwed up in disgust. It was aimed at the HPSC, Hitoshi knew, but he wished his dad could remain a little more neutral in front of the boy who had probably never had someone on his side before. "He's not mad at you," Hitoshi hurried to clarify. "He's trying to say that you can growl and fight and stand however you want." Midoriya's eyes flicked to Aizawa in a telling way. Hitoshi resisted the urge to strangle his father. With this new information, his reaction to Midoriya's growl at the dinner table the other night was even worse. "Right, Dad?" he prompted through gritted teeth. "Midoriya can act however comes naturally as it's a part of his quirk and doesn't make him less human." "Of course it doesn't," Aizawa finally spoke up, his dark eyes fixed on Midoriya. "Now, you can't go biting and poisoning my students in spars. But that's an extension of the no serious injuries rule, not a condemnation of your abilities." Midoriya didn't say anything. As Hitoshi watched, his fingers twitched then stilled, his feathers rustling almost imperceptibly. Hitoshi realized that they hadn't asked him a question. He mentally face-palmed. "Does that make sense?" he asked. "I know it's different than what you've been taught, but things are different here. You can talk to us and ask questions too if you're confused about anything." Talon hands rose, and Hitoshi felt a moment of hope that they'd gotten through to him and he would open up. "I understand." His heart sank. Judging by the quiet exhale across the table, his papa felt the same way. The man brightened momentarily as Midoriya continued. "May I go to the bedroom?" Hisashi froze, glancing at Aizawa. "Oh, well, you haven't eaten dinner, but if that's what you want." He trailed off. When Midoriya said nothing, Hisashi gave him permission. They watched the dragon boy move silently down the hall and slip inside his room. "Well," Hisashi said, downcast, "it was technically a question. That's progress, right? Did you notice that his signing seems really fluent sometimes and really choppy at others?" Hitoshi asked. Hisashi nodded. "I thought about that. I think he's using as few words as possible, disregarding grammar along the way. And I noticed he said the bedroom, not his bedroom." Hitoshi grimaced. "It's only been a few days. Hopefully he'll settle in at some point. He's already attached, at the very least, to all the stuff you guys bought him. Eventually, that may extend to the rest of us." Aizawa ate quietly. "I asked Hound Dog if he'd speak with Midoriya. He's willing to see him every day at school, but if he won't speak then there's not much point." Eyes on Midoriya's full bowl, Hisashi frowned. "He definitely needs therapy, but you're right. The talking is kind of important. Has he actually eaten a single meal with us?" he asked abruptly. Hitoshi had already figured out his pattern. "No, not since Dad yelled at him. He waits for you to put the leftovers in the fridge and then sneaks out to eat them. Hisashi's eyes closed, and he took several steadying breaths. A glance at his other dad showed an uncharacteristic look of guilt on the man's face. Okay, Hisashi said slowly. Did he eat at school? He did, Aizawa said, voice heavy. The rat contacted me to say that Midoriya was eating in the vents. He had eyes on him at all times, so I let it go. So, he's hiding. The table fell into a solemn silence. They finished their meal, and Hisashi wrapped up Midoriya's food as always. When the last dish was washed and put away, Aizawa spoke. I'll fix this. Hisashi nodded, folding the dish towel and placing it on the rack. He will. Hitoshi waited until his dads had gone to bed before slipping out of his room. He stood in front of Midoriya's door, hand raised. He'd been in the same position for several seconds, overthinking this whole endeavor. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe he just needed to let Midoriya come out of his shell at his own pace. But with how much his dad was fucking it up, the decision was made for him when the door creaked open, a single luminescent green eye appearing in the crack. Hitoshi startled, yanking his hand back. The movement must have startled Midoriya as well, who flinched back. Shit, sorry, Hitoshi whispered, not wanting to alert his dads. He'd gotten the impression that they, even Hisashi, would prefer that the two have the majority of their interactions under some kind of supervision. Midoriya only blinked, seemingly waiting for something. Can I come in? Hitoshi said, hesitantly. Green eyes flicked to the dark, empty hallway behind him. After a moment of assessment, Midoriya stepped back, almost disappearing into the darkness of his room. Hitoshi took this as an invitation and slipped inside. When he closed the door, it was pitch black. Right, Hitoshi remembered. They'd bought him blackout curtains at the store clerk's suggestion. I can't see like this, he whispered. I'm just gonna turn on the lights a little, okay? Watch your eyes. Thankfully, the overhead lights in this room were on a dimmer switch, so he was able to ease the room into a gentle glow. He jerked a little when he realized that Midoriya stood barely a foot away, angled toward his exposed back. He took a casual step to the side. Ah, hey, he said, aimlessly. With the door closed, he dropped the whisper, speaking instead in a low voice. He was prepared for Midoriya not to hold his side of the conversation at this point, and instead glanced around the room at the bare bed and lavishly dressed nest that he would not be going within 5 feet of without invitation. If you don't want to use the bed, we can get rid of it so you have some more room, he said, aiming for something lighthearted. He nodded toward it. Can I sit? Midoriya looked at him, head tilted like a cat. His eyes flashed, reflecting the overhead lights as he nodded. So cool, Hitoshi breathed unintentionally. Midoriya blinked, and Hitoshi flushed, realizing he'd said that out loud. Shit, it's just, I really like mutation quirks, he admitted, shuffling back to curl up on the bed. He was tempted to hide his face in his knees but resisted in case Midoriya tried to sign something to him. To his shock, the boy actually did. I don't like liars. Midoriya's face, while not exactly expressive, had taken on a stiff, granite quality as he stared at the wall to Hitoshi's right. Huh? Hitoshi's eyes widened in shock. What do you mean? Midoriya finally met his eyes, jaw set. No one likes a monster. Hitoshi could actually feel the blood drain out of his face, only 2 spots of color remaining high on his cheekbones. That, you're not. No, he finally managed to splutter out. Those HPSC bastards. Midoriya just watched him. Hitoshi took a deep breath. Midoriya, he sighed. Mutation quirks. There's nothing wrong with them. He really needed the boy to understand that, even if Hitoshi knew that it would probably take years and lots of therapy to make a dent in the obviously intense amount of discrimination he'd faced. Most of us have quirks, and sometimes those quirks are visible. He hesitated before continuing. Some quirks are dangerous and others aren't. People will say that some quirks are villainous or heroic. Sometimes people call us monsters. But we aren't, he said, voice wavering before he reined himself back in. We're all just people. Midoriya's face had softened into something unreadable but no longer hostile. You're human though. So are you, Hitoshi insisted. No wings or talons or instincts can change that. They stayed silent for a few moments before Midoriya turned and stepped towards his nest. After a brief glance at Hitoshi, he crawled in, burying himself in blankets until only his eyes and a shock of green curls peeked out. Hitoshi almost combusted at the adorableness. Keeping control of himself, he settled more comfortably on the bare mattress, resisting the uncharacteristic urge to squeal. He almost initiated a new conversation when Midoriya shifted enough to reveal his hands. What's your assignment? Hitoshi's brow furrowed. Assignment? Maybe he was talking about school. I've got some English homework. Dad, Aizawa, Micah's papa, assigned us a 5-page paper on the ethics of vigilantism, the sadist. Midoriya's eyes narrowed slightly, but he seemed to accept the answer. And what are Aizawa and Yamada's roles? Hitoshi felt a little awkward at this question, unsure if Midoriya was asking about their personal or professional lives. Well, they're both teachers, obviously, and they're heroes. But at home, he hesitated. How did he describe parenting to someone who seemingly hadn't experienced it? They take care of us. They make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. If we have any problems, they help us fix them. Who's in charge? Hitoshi frowned. That was a bit antiquated. It felt almost like the age-old who's the woman question. And Hitoshi couldn't help feeling a little defensive. Neither of them. They share the responsibilities and make decisions together. Midoriya appeared to mull this over. In the lull, Hitoshi took a moment to appreciate that he was actually communicating with the boy. He honestly hadn't been optimistic when he'd come up with this idea, but it seemed that Midoriya was a little more forthcoming when his dads weren't present. Tentatively, Hitoshi asked, "How are you liking it here? I know it's been a little rocky, but is there anything we can do to help?" Actual, visible confusion painted the boy's face. "It's okay," he signed hesitantly. "It's different than my usual setup, but I can get used to it." Hitoshi nodded. "I felt like that too. When I left my last family, it was so different. The bed was too soft. I kept waiting for them to scream at me. I hid food because I expected them to take it away at some point." His expression turned grave. "Midoriya," he grimaced, not wanting to break the tentative peace but needing to say it, "it's okay to eat with us." The green-haired boy visibly hunched into his blankets. Hitoshi hurried forward, committed now. "Dad overreacted. He shouldn't have snapped at you like that," he said. "He freaks out sometimes when he thinks someone is threatening Pops. But he is not going to do that again," he swore. "Pops just about ripped him a new one. So please," Hitoshi swallowed, "please eat. It's not healthy to go on like you have been." Midoriya peered through the tiny slit in the blankets he'd retreated into. After a pause, he gave a short nod. Hitoshi breathed out, relieved he at least hadn't fucked up majorly, even if Midoriya didn't seem convinced. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, I'll let you go to sleep," he said, "unless you have anything else you want to ask." Midoriya shook his head, more of a twitch than a recognizable movement. "Okay," Hitoshi repeated, sliding off the bed and careful to keep his movements slow. "Good night, Midoriya." He dimmed the lights completely before slipping out the door. He stood in the hallway for a minute in the dark. His hands were shaking slightly. They were getting somewhere, he thought, relieved. Everything was going to be fine. 49 stared at the closed door, relieved that the light bulbs were no longer etching their burning outline into his retina. He'd been nervous asking so many questions of an asset that was clearly devoted to his handlers, but in the end 49 had gotten some information. Shinsou for some reason seemed to still be in training. That, or his assignment was simply infiltration of the high school, or it was classified and that's why his answer was so misleading. 49 frowned. He'd rarely worked with other assets and never on separate but simultaneous assignments. It was frustrating. Aizawa and Yamato were a strange combination of handler and trainer. From Shinsou's description, they shared the same role and had no clear hierarchy. Again, odd. But then, 49 had never undertaken an undercover assignment of this nature. Likely the organization was to make the farce more difficult to detect. 49 snuggled deeper into the nest of blankets, mind fogging momentarily in the comfort before he refocused. Shinsou's little speech at the end had been oddly genuine, but 49 guessed he was concerned that their handlers would punish them both should 49 seconds' performance diminish due to lack of nutrition. He wasn't too worried about it since he'd been eating secretly, but he acknowledged even that was unsustainable. He couldn't really hide the fact that he wasn't eating when they all sat together at meals. Frankly, it was shocking he had gotten away with it even for these past few days. 49 sighed, burying himself deeper. There was no choice. He'd have to overcome the churning nausea and anxiety whenever he attempted to eat while observed. His muscles tightened involuntarily as he recalled being force-fed in the past when his handlers became frustrated with his odd eating habits. It didn't matter. He would do what was required of him. As he drifted into sleep, his mind filled with images of red eyes and silver hair and soft hands playing with his feathers. It seemed that going to UA was going to be a consistent theme. 49 would sit at the extra desk placed between Hitoshi and the window. After a couple days of this, the teachers began giving him the same in-class assignments as the other students. He wasn't sure why. None of the work seemed especially difficult. The HPSC liked to keep him busy, so any time not spent on training and assignments was devoted to academic pursuits. He'd learned through an online curriculum, usually alone in his room. He knew the cameras were watching though. He knew the consequences if he slacked off. When the teachers took his work though, he noticed the surprise on their faces. The difficulty of the assignments increased sharply after a few days of this. And when 49 glanced at the work on the students' desks, it differed from his own. He was being singled out. Granted, he wasn't a student and so already occupied the position of other, but something about this made him uneasy. He didn't know what the right move was. He didn't know what he was doing here. Apart from the debrief in the hospital with Aizawa, no one was following protocol. And while 49 knew better than to ask questions, he'd never been left in the dark this long before. It was counterproductive to the success of his missions not to know what the mission was. He was grasping at straws. The only answer he could come up with was that he was similar to Shinsou, training with or infiltrating UA High School. If he was training, he needed to absorb all the information they were providing to him. If he was infiltrating, then he needed to lay low and not draw attention. So, he began completing his assignments twice, once correctly and once at what seemed to be the average comprehension levels of those around him. He relaxed when the assignments he was given began to decrease in difficulty to match the students once more. Granted, he was bored, but at least he wasn't drawing suspicion. 49 squirmed in his seat, trying to find a comfortable position with his wings. The way they constantly brushed against the back of the chair, despite him practically hunching over the desk, was starting to make him want to peel off his skin. The feathers were sensitive, each transmitting sensory information into his brain. Great for flying, terrible for sitting still indoors for the vast majority of every day. His fingers curled, accidentally scraping his talons over the lacquered surface, leaving 4 divots. 49 froze as the noise drew the attention of the room, the instructor included. The anthropomorphized block of cement eyed him. Everything all right, Midoriya? What would they do? He knew better than to lose control like that. His fingers twitched, and he yanked his hands to his chest. Would they clip his talons? The HPSC had done that sometimes, leaving him with blunt, useless claws. They bled and the hard material splintered and caught on everything. He hated that. It was better than threats to remove them entirely though. He'd seen assets who'd been declawed. Their chronic pain, their clumsiness. 49 hadn't realized he'd retreated entirely into his own head until a hand brushed his shoulder. All of a sudden it was too much, too many eyes, too many things touching him. He threw himself to the side, practically crashing into the wall. Multiple voices were speaking and he wasn't processing any of it. A blur of purple consumed his vision. When it reached for him, he snapped, instinct taking over. He raked his talons at his attacker and threw himself through the window, wings coming around him to shield from the broken glass. He threw them open just before hitting the ground and streaked for the forest. He heard screaming and explosions behind him, but he couldn't think, couldn't process anything but the need to get away, escape. Katsuki cursed, throwing himself after the winged idiot. He was going to get his government assassin ass in deep shit running off like that. Not that Katsuki put all the blame on him when their class was obnoxious enough that he was overstimulated a lot of the time. And the purple-haired fuck kept trying to touch him despite being on the verge of a panic attack or even a flashback. The fucking dragon was fast. Katsuki could barely keep him in his sight. He cursed when the boy dove into the trees. How the fuck was he going to find a freaking green lizard in a forest? Whatever, Katsuki wasn't a bitch. He propelled himself into the forest, dropping down in the general area he'd seen the other boy. Red eyes scanned the trees, searching for any sign of his target. When he heard a distinct rustling to his left, his head snapped towards it. He didn't move, not wanting to alert the boy. After a minute, the rustling stopped, replaced by a rhythmic noise he couldn't identify. Katsuki scanned the ground, careful not to step on anything loud. After creeping forward, Katsuki managed to catch a glimpse of Midoriya. He straddled a fallen tree, feathers puffed out in distressed disarray, raking his claws down the trunk like a cat with a scratching board. Short, irritated growls punctuated his jerky movements. And when Katsuki looked closer, his lips were glossy with some liquid that looked a touch too green to be saliva. Venom. That was badass. And a little gross. A stick snapped under his shoe as he shifted to see better. Shit. Katsuki barely had a moment to straighten before the other boy's head snapped up, and he threw himself across the clearing so fast that Katsuki only managed to shove his hand into the other's face to hold him back as they tumbled to the forest floor. They wrestled for a moment before Katsuki was able to distract Midoriya with a small explosion next to his ear. The boy flinched and Katsuki used that to shift their positions, pinning the smaller boy to the ground. Midoriya thrashed, pupils dilated to slits, fangs on full display. Hold still, shit, Katsuki panted, avoiding the very lethal teeth that nearly snapped shut around his wrist. Midoriya, calm the fuck down. Katsuki recognized the look in his eye. Midoriya was gone. Whatever was happening in his head wasn't what was happening in the real world. Not to mention the obviously screwy animal instincts he was experiencing. Katsuki nearly screamed in frustration when the boy almost succeeded in dislodging him. Fed up, Katsuki pinned one arm under his knee, using his free hand to wrench the boy's head to the side. Fucking biting people, what the fuck? He muttered harshly, see how you like it, lizard fuck, and he sank his teeth into the boy's neck. Midoriya jerked under him and, unexpectedly, went still. Katsuki, feeling a little mean, dug his teeth in deeper before releasing his jaw. When he lifted his head, Midoriya was limp under him. Boy, he said, poking his cheek, unwilling to let go in case the boy went mental again. Lizard face, wake up. Midoriya blinked languidly, before turning his head to look at Katsuki. His hands twitched, and Katsuki realized he couldn't speak until Katsuki let him go. TCH, just don't lose your shit again. He shifted backward cautiously, releasing Midoriya's wrists. With sloppy, shaky movements, Midoriya signed, what's going on? Katsuki sighed. You freaked the fuck out. Not that anyone should be surprised, he scoffed. Have they even got you talking to anyone about the shit you've been through? When Midoriya just looked confused, Katsuki sighed, of course not. Fucking idiot teachers. You gonna be good if I let you up? At Midoriya's nod, Katsuki shifted his weight off the smaller boy's hips, sitting back against a tree instead. So, Katsuki started as Midoriya dragged himself backward to sit back against a tree of his own. What set you off back there? Midoriya shrugged, avoiding eye contact. What's going to happen? Katsuki sighed. I don't know. I don't know what kind of shit restrictions they have you on. What have they told you? An uncharacteristically irritated expression flitted across his face. Nothing. Cuffs stay on. He gestured to the quirk-canceling bracelets. Don't attack anyone. Do what you're told. I don't know what's happening. Those dumbasses. Katsuki thumped his head back against the tree. Being vague like that is sure to freak you the fuck out. What's going to happen though? Midoriya said. I lost control. Damaged property. Katsuki frowned. That window. Midoriya looked confused then flinched like he'd just remembered. The desk. Shit, that's what you were worried about. Katsuki scoffed. We go through like 3 desks a week in our class. It's fucking fine. Pinky melted hers just a couple days ago, remember? But the boy ran. Midoriya's signing picked up pace. And they were screaming. Because they're dramatic fucks, Katsuki said. Nothing fucking happened to them. They got detention. Had to clean some shit, stay after school. Midoriya studied his hands. They were still trembling slightly. It was too much. He signed slowly, like he wasn't sure if he should. The chairs hurt and everyone is loud and I'm not allowed to move. Yeah, school sucks like that. A moment of silence and then, I'll bring some of my old shit from middle school. Used to freak out having to be quiet and still all the time. Katsuki frowned. I have he hesitated, a hall pass, I guess. He shot Midoriya a glare. And if you say shit about it I'll beat your ass, but basically it tells the teachers that I need to leave to get my shit together. When we get back to the school, we'll tell Aizawa that you need one. Midoriya stiffened, feathers puffing up at the teacher's name. Katsuki's eyes narrowed. The fuck is your problem with Aizawa? But the green-haired boy's eyes suddenly looked distant again. Boy, Katsuki tried again. What the fuck just happened? When there was no response, Katsuki glanced at his watch, swearing when he realized how late it had gotten. They're gonna be up our asses soon. Midoriya, green eyes drifted his way. We're not done talking about whatever the fuck that was, but right now we've gotta get back. Midoriya's face didn't change, but the aura of dread around him deepened. Hey, stop that shit, he said, leaning over to flick the boy's forehead. Shockingly, this didn't earn him claws to the face. Nothing's going to happen to you. Yeah, they might be pissed and give us a lecture, might make us clean the classroom or stay home or whatever, but that's it. Red eyes scrutinized green. You with me? Midoriya blinked and gave a slow, unsure nod. Good, Katsuki said with a curt nod of acknowledgement. Now get your ass up. I'm not carrying you out of these damn woods. They only made it about 20 feet before a flurry of red feathers crashed down in front of them. Katsuki reeled back with a curse, pulling Midoriya with him and raising a hand primed to explode before realizing who it was. Hawks, you asshole, he grumbled, lowering his hand. The older man grinned. Blasty, he cried, after taking Takoyami as his apprentice. He'd all but adopted Class 1A, taking the role of annoying big brother with pride. Don't fucking call me that. Katsuki frowned as he saw how Midoriya had claimed the hero's attention. What are you even doing here? Hawks tilted his head in a distinctly bird-like manner, blinking golden eyes. I was in the neighborhood, heard a naughty little dragon ran off and thought I'd come help. Katsuki became aware of how rigid Midoriya was beside him. His wings were drawn tight to his body, feathers slightly puffed. His eyes were fixed on Hawks. When Katsuki glanced at Hawks, he caught a quick flash of hands, like sign language, but he didn't know what it meant. Midoriya's reaction was immediate though. He stepped forward, back straight and militant, his face smoothed into a mask so blank it gave Katsuki the creeps. Hawk's eyes narrowed before smoothing to mimic Midoriya's. I see, he said, and if Katsuki didn't know any better, he'd say there was a hint of unhappiness in his voice. Well, let's get you two back to the school, huh? He said, reaching for Katsuki like he was going to grab and fly them back himself. Before Katsuki could blow the fucker up, he could fly himself, damn it. Midoriya appeared between them in a flash of green. Katsuki blinked in surprise. Midoriya's entire bearing had changed. All 4 wings were flared threateningly, and his teeth were bared. A rumbling growl filled the clearing. Hawk stepped back, shocked to match Katsuki's, filling his face. Midoriya, what the fuck? Katsuki hissed. The boy glanced at him for the briefest second, before returning to stare Hawks down. His face was pale, and he'd started shaking and sweating. Hawks' eyes dropped down to the boy's throat where the sudden movement had caused his collar to shift, revealing a reddened bite mark. Gold eyes widened. He lowered his wings slowly, lifting his hands in surrender. Easy there, hatchling, he said, voice low and calm. I'm not going to touch him. Midoriya bristled, then seemed to flinch at his own movement. Him, Katsuki said, voice pitching higher than he intended. What the fuck is going on? Hawks didn't take his eyes off Midoriya. Bakugo, I need you to stay calm. Midoriya is currently fighting an internal war between training that is telling him to submit to me as his superior, and instincts that are telling him to protect you at all costs. Katsuki's hackles raised. Protect me, like some weakling. Fuck that. Katsuki grabbed Midoriya's shoulder and yanked, breaking the boy's stare down with Hawks. Midoriya snarled, looking nearly feral again. Katsuki ignored Hawks' cry of alarm as he shoved Midoriya backward until he collided with a tree. Listen here, dipshit, he said, nearly spitting as he crowded the boy, forcing him to keep his eyes on Katsuki. I don't need protection from anyone, so you can back the fuck off. Midoriya tried to push past Katsuki, but he grabbed the smaller boy's shoulders, digging his thumb into the bruise on his neck. Instantly, Midoriya went limp, head lolling to expose his throat. Shit, Katsuki grunted as he caught him, not expecting to suddenly be holding up a whole-ass human being. He snapped his fingers in front of the boy's face, but his eyes were dull and glazed again. What the actual fuck, Hawks? The man had fallen into a tense crouch, unsure whether to intervene. He didn't approach them. How long has this been going on? Hawks asked, voice uncharacteristically serious. What? Katsuki said, propping his limp, kind of classmate up against the tree. How long has what been going on? Hawks ran a hand over his face with a sigh. Midoriya's instincts have claimed you. I'm not overly familiar with dragons. I know they are social animals. They are also extremely protective and possessive. How long has he been acting like this? I don't. Katsuki trailed off, uncharacteristically lost. This was the first time. We barely know each other. Hawk's eyebrows rose. There was a bite mark on his neck. Katsuki flushed. Because he was going crazy. I followed him out here so he didn't get his paroled ass thrown in Tartarus or whatever, and he kept trying to bite me, so I figured. Hawk stared at him in disbelief before collapsing onto his back in the dirt. Oh my god. What? Katsuki hissed, getting pissed off again. What the hell does it mean if he choked on the word, claimed me? Hawk sighed and rolled over to look at the teen. It's not bad, and it's not permanent. Again, I'm not an expert on dragons. From what I can tell, he's likely accepted you as part of his. He trailed off. Pack. No, that's wolves, he muttered, almost to himself. He snapped his fingers. Horde. Excuse you, Katsuki said, voice chilled. Hawks waved him off. It's not the end of the world. You can choose not to be a part of it. Without you two spending a lot of time together and actively building a bond, it will go away. It's just because it's so new that he's so affected. Plus, he grimaced, he's going through a lot of shit. Repressed instincts, trauma, puberty. His teasing grin returned at the last word, and Katsuki resisted the urge to clamp his hands over his ears. Anyway, Hawks continued, looking more cheerful. As long as I don't come super close, he shouldn't freak out. He sees me as a threat right now. Katsuki looked down and poked the practically catatonic teen's cheek. Yeah, he definitely seems ready for a fight. Hawks rolled his eyes. Well, you practically tranquilized him. A hint of a frown crept back onto his face. I wouldn't have expected it to hold him so long through. The frown instantly shifted into a mischievous look. A cuddle will probably bring him out of it. Huh, Katsuki cried, appalled. Why the fuck? It's an instincts thing, Hawks shrugged. Physical contact with Horde members means safety. By pressing on that mark, you basically told his body to shut down. He should come out of it on his own, but with everything, it's possible he's not reacting the way he should. Katsuki gave him a flat glare. Not letting on that he was taking note of all this shit, did Hawks not realize how much he was giving away? For later. Oi, lizard face. He grabbed Midoriya's jaw and forced glazed green eyes to meet his own. Wake the fuck up. He flicked his forehead for good measure. For a second, Katsuki thought it wasn't going to work and he was actually going to have to cuddle the shithead. Before the boy blinked sluggishly. Kakin, the fuck did you just call me? Katsuki said, shoving the teen back instinctively and refusing to feel guilty about the little oof that left his lips as his back collided with the tree. Wait, you can speak. Midoriya just blinked, looking dazed and confused. Bakugo, give him a minute. Hawk's voice was so uncharacteristically solemn that Katsuki didn't argue. Unfortunately, the man's voice reminded Midoriya of his presence, and Katsuki could see the moment it registered, could watch his pupils shrink, and something about it triggered warning bells in his mind, pulling forward fuzzy images of a mop of green hair, a grin with missing front teeth and sharp canines. Deku. Midoriya paused, almost seeming to glitch as several expressions started to form before being replaced. Finally, confusion won out, but at least his attention was back on Katsuki. What? Midoriya signed. Katsuki stared at him, mind scrambling to piece together scraps of memory. I don't. His voice cracked, and he didn't know why his chest was suddenly tight. He cleared his throat. Whatever, we need to get out of here. He pulled Deku, Midoriya, to his feet. When he didn't let go of his arm, Katsuki justified it to himself by saying that he couldn't risk the stupid lizard going after Hawks again. Hawks was watching them. What? Katsuki snarled, tightening his grip on Midoriya. Are we in a rush or not? Yeah, Hawks nodded. I'm going to go back with you guys. I want to check something with your teachers. Let's walk though. Katsuki frowned but didn't argue. Maybe Hawks was worried about Midoriya freaking out again. So, Hawks said casually as they trudged through the woods, keeping Midoriya between him and Katsuki. Midoriya, how are you settling in? The teen frankly still looked shell-shocked, but he seemed calm as long as Katsuki kept a grip on him. Fine, Midoriya signed. Aizawa and Yamada have been nice. Then he made a sign that Katsuki didn't know. Hawks seemed to know it though, based on his tight expression. That's great, he exclaimed, over-emphatically. I look forward to having a conversation with them. Katsuki's heart skipped a beat, hair raising at the wave of malice that seemed to fill the woods before disappearing so fast Katsuki thought he must have imagined it. Midoriya seemed to have felt it too though, shifting immediately into a protective stance in front of Katsuki who huffed. Irritated, Hawks fell into a non-threatening posture. Sorry, hatchling, he said, voice taking on that calm, soothing tone again. I was thinking about something else. His head tilted, and he released a soft, questioning trill. Katsuki hadn't even known the asshole could make bird noises, and he nearly dropped Midoriya's arm when he mirrored Hawks, head tilting and letting out a trill of his own. It was a little deeper, more rumbling, but something in the air shifted, becoming warmer, more comforting. Hawks' face softened. And when he glanced at Katsuki, he knew that the only reason Hawks wasn't approaching was because Midoriya would freak out if he came near Katsuki. After a moment of quiet, they began moving towards the school again. This time, Hawks took the lead while Midoriya trailed after him, with Katsuki dragged along by the grip on his arm. Soon, the school came into view, and Katsuki's shoulders slumped in relief. There had been too much weirdness in the past hour. Keigo hadn't had to work so hard to keep his cool in years. But right now, despite the suspicion and anger and worry that were warring inside him, he refused to let it show. He had a stressed, injured hatchling who deserved his full attention right now. He surreptitiously sent several feathers out ahead of them to warn him of who was approaching. Bakugo was being surprisingly cooperative, or perhaps intuitive given that he'd ignored pretty much everything Keigo had told him, and had managed to keep things under control despite being obviously bewildered by the turn of events. Keigo's heart had stopped when he'd seen the mark on Midoriya. Hormones and instincts made a nasty combination, and teenagers with mutation quirks could be volatile at best. Keigo had been concerned he'd have to physically subdue the kid. And while Bakugo's method was questionable at best, he had managed to de-escalate the situation. The signs Midoriya had slipped into their conversation though. Keigo fought to keep the frown off his face. Those were HPSC-specific signs. While agents primarily used typical Japanese sign language, there were some signals intended to communicate confidential information or to communicate quickly. The fact that Midoriya thought Keigo was an HPSC agent, worse, that he communicated as if he believed himself to be one as well. Something was wrong. And if he found out that Nenzu and Aizawa had anything to do with it after he'd trusted them with the kids... he was going to lose his shit. Keigo was broken from his thoughts as they entered the school. And one of his feathers alerted him that Aizawa was in Recovery Girl's office. He set off in that direction, missing how the teens trailing behind him had to trot along to keep pace. He ignored the students that gawked as the trio swept by. The office door was cracked, a flash of purple and black appearing through the crack before he kicked it open, a little more harshly than he intended. Aizawa, he said, his grin showing slightly more teeth than usual. I've found your charge. Aizawa spun around from where he'd been examining the purple-haired teen's arm. Shinsou, Keigo recalled briefly. The kid who'd joined late. Hawks, Aizawa said, eyes flashing red when he saw the two teens behind him. Midoriya, he said, and Keigo did not like that tone. The teen in question stepped forward, wings tucked tight and face utterly blank. He didn't seem to know who he was supposed to face, eyes flicking between Keigo and Aizawa. He doesn't know who is more highly ranked, Keigo realized. I made my expectations clear, Aizawa growled, eyes flashing again. You injured Hitoshi. Dad, Shinsou started but quieted when Aizawa raised his hand for silence. In 2 strides, Aizawa stood before Midoriya. You made an agreement. I stated explicitly that threatening or injuring Hisashi, Hitoshi, or myself in any way was strictly out of the question, and you said that you understood. So why am I standing in Recovery Girl's office after you've mauled my son's arm? Keigo nearly intervened when Midoriya replied. I apologize. I will accept any and all consequences you see fit. And then he signed something that sent Keigo's faint hope crashing. It was a brief sign, one specific to the HPSC, intended to show respect. It was used explicitly with superior officers. Keigo shot between them, no longer bothering to hide his bared teeth with a grin. Aizawa stepped back, shock on his face. Hawks, what are you? Why the fuck does Midoriya seem to think that you are his superior officer? Keigo spat, wings spreading to hide the boy behind him. If you hadn't assisted in taking down that godforsaken facility, I would be questioning right now if you were an HPSC spy. He what? Shinsou said, staring at his dad's paling face. Dad, what is he talking about? Aizawa raked a hand through his hair. Hawks, why do you assume that? Golden eyes narrowed dangerously. His behavior, his body language, the fact that he's using fucking HPSC titled signs with you. Out of the corner of his eye, Hawks saw Bakugo pull Midoriya backward and closer to himself, eyes narrowed at his teacher. He stiffened when his feathers alerted him to two people coming his way. After a moment he recognized Nezu and Yamada. His nostrils flared and he couldn't keep himself from tensing further. On edge with an adversary in front of him and two potentials coming from the back where he was shielding two hatchlings. He suppressed the anxious trill that wanted to escape his chest, only releasing a quiet hum beyond human range. He twitched when an answering call came from behind him. Nezu and Yamada turned the corner. Before he could think about it, Keigo stepped backward, pushing Midoriya and Bakugo into the hallway so that he could keep all the adults in his sight. Nezu and Yamada froze at his defensive posture. Hawks, Yamada said, voice gentle. He'd always been kind to Keigo. He was one of the only adults Keigo felt attached to. Not enough to drop his wings though. Not with hatchlings at risk. What's going on? Is that Midoriya behind you? Aizawa must have gotten over his shock enough to step out into the hallway at the sound of his husband's voice. Yamada got a good look at his husband's pale, rigid face, and his eyes narrowed. Shouta, what is going on? Nezu surveyed the scene. The quiet, tense teenagers, guilt-ridden teacher, and defensive pro-hero. Why don't we all take a breath and step into Recovery Girl's office? He suggested, although his tone made it clear he expected to be obeyed. Something tells me this is not a conversation we should be having where students might listen in. The rat ushered his teachers through the door, allowing Keigo to enter only when everyone had settled into the stiff, hospital furniture. They waited while Keigo got the boys settled behind him. Well then, Nezu said, clapping his hands. What have you all gotten yourselves into? Katsuki stayed quiet only because he had a feeling he would be summarily kicked out if any of them paid enough attention to realize he was present. But seriously, what the fuck? Not only was his teacher acting shady as fuck and apparently leading Midoriya to believe he was still working for the fucking HPSC, but Hawks was acting weird. Like, Katsuki's eyes widened as it clicked. He was acting kind of like Midoriya when he got overwhelmed and dragonish. Katsuki internally swore. Did all mutation quirks have funky instincts that he didn't know about? Regardless, it seemed Hawks did, and he just didn't let anyone know. While Katsuki bristled again at the idea of being protected, especially from his teachers, he ignored that to focus on Midoriya, who had gone pale and spacey again. Midoriya is currently fighting an internal war between training that is telling him to submit to me as his superior, and instincts that are telling him to protect you at all costs. Katsuki frowned. Not a lot of information about the actual program the HPSC had been running had been released to the public. But with anything involving child soldiers, it was probably a good bet there was some level of conditioning and brainwashing involved. Midoriya had that same look now, sweaty and shaken, like he was fighting something inside himself. Another unwelcome tidbit from his earlier conversation floated to mind. Physical contact with Horde members means safety. His cheeks flushed at the thought, but if Midoriya lost his shit, the adults would remember they were in the room, and he'd never know what was going on. Before he could talk himself out of it, Katsuki pulled with the hand already wrapped around Midoriya's bicep. Ignoring the questioning green eyes and suddenly grateful that Hawk's wings were almost entirely hiding them from view, Katsuki pulled the smaller boy into his chest, wrapping his own arm around his lower back to avoid the wings and cupping the back of his head with the other. Midoriya stiffened, and Katsuki panicked. Before the boy could freak out, Katsuki ran his fingers through the hair behind his ear, scratching his scalp softly, and suddenly he found himself with an armful of limp dragon. For fuck's sake, he rolled his eyes as he sat back on the bench, pulling Midoriya with him. This was different from the other times, he noticed, scrutinizing the half-lidded eyes. His own widened when he felt a vibration where Midoriya's chest rested against his own. Was this motherfucker purring? He pulled his hand away just long enough to raise his finger to his lips in an SH gesture. Midoriya nodded before nosing back under Katsuki's hand. He rolled his eyes but obligingly gave head scratches. Memories again threatened to surface, an odd sense of déjà vu, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the conversation at hand. Okay, Hisashi said, raising his hands in an everyone calm down gesture. Let's just take a breath and work this out. That sounds like an excellent idea. Nezu piped in, squirming slightly backward into the visitor chair beside the hospital cot and pulling out a steaming cup of tea from. Where on earth did he get that? Hisashi couldn't focus on the rat's ability to manifest hot beverages from thin air when the murderous aura around the number 2 pro-hero double. Hisashi's brow furrowed as he studied the younger man. Hisashi liked to think that the two of them shared a bit of a bond. He'd stepped in when some of Hawks' history with the HPSC came out, tried to give him support, even a bit of a family connection. He'd never seen Hawks look at him with such distrust before. It broke his heart, and the niggling suspicion that his husband had done something to cause it added heat to the slowly building knot of anger he'd been nursing about this whole situation. "The only person I want to hear explaining is Eraserhead," Hawks snapped, and Hisashi cringed at the title. They hadn't managed to get Hawks to use familiar names with them, but they had at least been shortened to Mike and Eraser. His husband's minute flinch, barely more than a blink, said that he hadn't missed the shift either. For example, why was it that when I came upon Midoriya in the forest, he immediately assumed I worked for the HPSC and had been sent to collect him? Hawks's eyes were practically glowing, and there was an edge to his voice that was oddly reminiscent of a bird's screech. "I was willing to give you the benefit of the doubt," Hawks continued. "That shit is insidious. Maybe he just reverted when he saw someone." The pro faltered but rallied, "someone known to be HPSC property." They all flinched at the choice in words. "But then you," Hawks practically hissed. "More than me. More than the poster child for the HPSC. You, Eraserhead, show every indication of acting like an HPSC superior officer. The expectations, the way you speak, the way you expect Midoriya to respond, to comply. So either you are an entire goddamned moron who should never have taken on this responsibility, or you have deliberately cast yourself in that light for some unknown, but undoubtedly completely unacceptable reason. So which is it?" Hisashi watched the blood drain out of his husband's face in real time, and nearly staggered as the pit in his stomach yawned, every horrible feeling he had but dismissed about this situation pouring out at once. "Shouta, what have you done?" Black eyes met his, desperate. Shouta flinched and looked away from whatever he saw on Hisashi's face. "I had no idea we would be asked to take him in," his husband said, voice hoarse. "You have to understand, I didn't know." Shouta looked to him again, as close to pleading as he was capable of. "After the raid, we needed answers. Tsukachi wasn't getting anywhere. We didn't know how Midoriya ended up with Overhaul or what his role had been. We needed to know what he'd done to Eri." Shouta paused, firming his shoulders. "I had read over the report of how the HPSC training protocols ensured mission reports could be given regardless of the situation or condition of the asset. I mimicked their format in order to get answers." Hisashi covered his mouth. He cut himself off when everyone in the room flinched at the volume of his voice. "You acted like Midoriya's abusers to get answers. Right after we'd rescued him from the Yakuza. After he'd been tortured emotionally and physically and nearly died. And then you took him in." Hawks cut in, practically vibrating with rage, not even giving Shouta a chance to speak. "You took him into your home, knowing what he thought." Shouta shook his head. "I told Tsukachi I couldn't take him. I told them it was a bad idea, that it was too much to have 2, soon to be 3 traumatized kids at once. But you didn't tell us why." Hisashi shouted, losing control completely. "You didn't say, Hisashi, I tricked this traumatized teenager into thinking I was his abuser so I could interrogate him. So maybe he wouldn't feel safe in our home." Goddammit, Shouta. If any more of Shouta's blood drained from his face, he'd pass out from lack of oxygen to the brain. "I don't think anyone in this room really cares for your thoughts at the moment," chimed an unexpected voice. Hisashi's eyes shot to Nezu, who he'd frankly forgotten was in the room. The rat was perfectly still, but there was an uncharacteristically menacing look on his face, completely devoid of his usual sadistic grin. "Clearly, I made an error in judgment allowing Midoriya to be placed with you. You had such success with Shinsou." His eyes narrowed. "Regardless, a new placement will have to be found. Perhaps ectoplasm." "I'll take him," Hawks said instantly. Hisashi's mouth fell open. For all Hawks's protectiveness, he would never have expected the hero to go that far. He had taken on a big brother role for Class 1A though. Nezu considered the man. "Do you have the time?" he asked bluntly. "Despite cutting ties with the HPSC, at least as much as any hero can, you still maintain one of the busiest schedules. Number 2 pro hero is not an easy title to hold." Hisashi saw a way to ease the sickening feeling in his gut at the idea of losing Midoriya entirely. "What about split custody? Just with me and Hawks?" Shouta would have no part in it. He ignored the distress on his husband's face. Nezu frowned. "Wouldn't that still require Midoriya to be in your home half the time?" Hisashi shook his head. "If Hawks is open to it, I could spend nights that he's working at his apartment. Otherwise, I can watch Midoriya in school and some weekends. It would take some scheduling, but I'm willing to put in the work." Hawks stared at him, and Hisashi felt a prickling on his skin at the predatory golden gaze. "We will need to talk to Midoriya," he said finally. "You might be too connected to Eraserhead for him to be comfortable. Otherwise, I have no objections." The small admittance of trust made his eyes burn with the threat of tears. This whole situation had been an emotional roller coaster. "How soon can we get the paperwork sorted?" "Assuming Midoriya agrees," he added. Nezu frowned. "Usually, heroes can activate an emergency foster license almost instantly. But because Midoriya is technically already being fostered, it complicates things. Legally, it'll take a day or 2 for the paperwork to go through the system, if you want to do things legally," he said, the slight lilt of a question in his voice. Hisashi rolled his eyes. That should be fine, he said, answering the demon rat's unspoken question. That just leaves us with the question of what to do in the interim. He'll stay with me. Katsuki almost didn't notice the words exiting his mouth, too overwhelmed with flashes of anger, shock, and disappointment at the revelations he'd semi-accidentally been privy to. Only Midoriya's weight on his chest had held him back this long. The adults and Mind Freak all swiveled to look at him, and he flushed red as they took in the way the other boy was draped over his front. He almost shoved Midoriya off him but stopped himself. Somehow, Midoriya had seemed almost entirely zoned out through this entire discussion, and the last thing he wanted to deal with was a panicking baby dragon. He'll stay with you, his homeroom teacher spoke up, voice resembling his usual deadpan for the first time since the beginning of the argument. Katsuki sent him a withering glare, closely followed by all the other pros in the room. That's what I said, isn't it? It's just for one shitty night anyway. Present Mike gave a small smile, miles away from his usual blinding grin. That's really cool of you, little listener, but Midoriya has to stay with a pro. He's still a flight risk. And there has to be an adult who can manage him if he has any outbursts. Did you forget we're in dorms? He said scathingly. He's going to be in a building with a bunch of heroes in training. The adults paused to consider that. Present Mike was frowning a little. I'm not sure about throwing him in with all your classmates. He said, you guys are a lot on a good day. Katsuki couldn't even bring himself to be offended. Look, I'll keep the extras away from him, okay? We'll just chill in my dorm and then go to classes like normal. It'll be fucking fine. I think it's a good idea. Hawks spoke up unexpectedly. You and Eraser needed to move into the dorms anyway, right? Hisashi winced. Yeah, we were putting it off so the little listener could get acclimated to being around people. And to make sure he was safe to be around everyone else went unsaid. And then he can come stay with me on weekends or if the dorms end up being too chaotic, Hawks said, nodding in consideration. He had relaxed slightly now that the focus was on coordinating rather than ripping Aizawa a new one. You're sure you want to take this on, Blasty? Hawks raised an eyebrow, gaze dropping to Midoriya's collar where the bite mark was hidden. Sharing a room with someone can really strengthen bonds. Katsuki scowled at the oversized bird over Midoriya's ridiculous green curls. Yeah, I said I'm fucking fine. Well then, Nedzu popped off the chair where he'd been observing them all. Hisashi, Hawks, why don't you two stay behind with Midoriya and I suspect Bakugo to discuss the changes in his circumstances? Shinsou, you can rejoin your classmates, although I must ask that you keep this to yourself. Shouta, I believe we need to have a discussion in my office. Everyone nodded and moved as directed. No one looked at Aizawa as he trailed behind Nedzu. There was a brief, awkward pause as the infirmary door swung shut, leaving Katsuki, Midoriya, Hawks, and Present Mike alone in the room. Blasty, Hawks said, voice uncharacteristically soft. If you could stop putting Midoriya to sleep, I'd appreciate it. It's a bit hard to hold a conversation with him like this. Katsuki frowned, craning his neck to try and see the stupid dragon's face. The boy's eyes were half shut and dreamy. TCH, how many off switches does the nerd have? He said, annoyed. How is he supposed to be a proper hero if he was put to sleep by a hand in his hair? Not as many as you'd think, Hawks said, lips twitching in amusement. Present Mike was watching with interest. If you two weren't close, then you wouldn't be having the same effect. Close, Mike parroted, looking between them. Deciding that was enough of that, Katsuki pulled his hand out of the nerd's hair, flicking his nose instead, and getting only a sleepy rumble that Katsuki could feel in his bones in response. Oi, lizard face, I'm not a fucking pillow, get off. The boy's lip curled up to bare his fangs in a way that was about as threatening as a kitten. He flicked Midoriya's nose once again for good measure before shoving him off. He ignored the way Hawks laughed at them. Midoriya's rumble turned into a squeak as he tumbled onto the floor. His head popped up, curls mussed, eyes bleary. Katsuki was surprised when the boy saw the adults and didn't immediately go into fight or flight. Guess Mike did something right. Midoriya did quiet though, standing and straightening himself up, giving the adults his full attention. Hey Midoriya, Mike smiled at him gently. We need to talk about a few things, okay? Why don't you take a seat? Green eyes flicking between them, Midoriya gave a slow nod and sat. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.